All right, folks, I'm going to call the meeting to order. As required under the Planning Act, a public meeting is being held prior to the committee making a decision on these applications. And to start things off, I will introduce the Committee of Adjustment members. And we have, my name is Robertson, Mr. Robertson, I'm the chairman. And we have Councillor Yeo, Mr. Marsh is the vice chair. Then we have Ms. Richardson, Ms. Archer, and Mr. Strangway. And we've got staff in person here. We've got Mr. Lahi, he's the acting secretary-treasurer. We've got the acting manager of planning, Ms. Berry, and our recording secretary is Ms. Crawford. And staff remotely, we've got the chief building officials, Ms. Murchison, and Mr. Harding, Planner 2, and Mr. Stainton, Planner 2. Welcome, everyone. Looks like we got quite a bit on the agenda today, so we'll work along as quickly as we can. All right. Can I get a motion on the floor to approve the agenda as printed? All right, Ms. Archer, Ms. Richardson, are there any comments or questions with respect to the agenda? All right, being none, all those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? All right, being none. Approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Well, are there any comments or questions, first of all, with respect to the minutes? All right, being none, then can I get a motion to adopt the minutes as printed? Mr. Marsh, Mr. Strangway? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. All right, for the benefit of everyone out there, those online and inside, the committee will hear comments, gather information, and may ask questions to clarify statements made. The committee may ask and answer questions or redirect questions to the appropriate person. Please note that any information or comments given to the committee during this meeting, those are considered evidence. We will first hear from staff, then the applicant or his or her agent. We will then hear from any person in support of or from those who have questions, concerns, or are opposed to the application. Finally, the applicant or his or her agent will have an opportunity to respond to any of the statements made to the committee. If you do wish to speak, we will afford you maximum 10 minutes to speak. Most people are under that by a mile, so I don't think we've ever had anyone go 10 minutes, but if you find you just can't possibly get all the information in, then I will ask committee if they will provide you a few more minutes to finish. But as I say, I don't think that has ever happened. As this is a virtual meeting with respect to the members of the public, when you come online, please state your name so we know who we're dealing with, and then we will carry on from there. So thank you. All right. The first application we're dealing with is a deferred application, and it's file number D20-2021-038, and this is 25 Manor Road, Geographic Township of Fenland, Ward 3. Mr. Stainton, go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee. The purpose and effect of this application is to request relief from the following provisions in order to permit the construction of an attached garage. And at this time, I will acknowledge the owner's statement that a storage compartment exists, albeit not as big as proposed, within the existing carport. A partial addition to the existing two-story dwelling, as well as a front entrance canopy, is also proposed. In regard to the parking requirements, relief is sought from section 3.14.1.2 to reduce the parking requirements in a residential zone from two spaces to one space. In regard to the front entrance canopy, relief from section 13.2.1.3 subsection A to reduce the minimum front yard from 7.5 meters to 0.05 meters. And in regard to the partial second story addition and the attached garage, Relief is sought from section 13.2.1.3, subsection B, I, to reduce the minimum interior side yard setback from 1.3 meters to 0.3 meters. And also relief from section 13.2.1.3, subsection E, to reduce the minimum water setback from 15 meters to 10.4 meters. And finally, relief from section 13.2.1.4 to increase the maximum lot coverage from 30% to 47%. The subject application was formally scheduled to be heard by the Committee of Adjustment at the August 19th, 2021 meeting. On August 18th, planning staff identified later in the analysis that only one parking space could legally be obtained on the lot based on the requirements of the Township of Fenland zoning bylaw. It was recommended that the application be deferred in order to recirculate and evaluate the relief from the one parking space in accordance with the requirements of the Township of Fenland zoning bylaw. The deferral would also allow an objection to the application from the abutting property owner, as well as alternative reliefs recommended by planning staff to be further considered by the applicant prior to a decision being made. It's important to note to the committee that during the meeting, the applicant and owners went on record as stating that they would be amenable to the staff recommendation put forth in the report. The applicant subsequently modified the proposal by including the relief for the additional parking space and removing the reference to expand the driveway. The application was last amended on September 27th, 2021. The subject property is situated on a peninsula on the western shore of Sturgeon Lake. The lots along this portion of the peninsula closest to the mainland are smaller in size. The neighborhood has no municipal water or wastewater services. The lots along the east side of the road are smaller and shallow, generally around 300 to 400 square meters. The lots within this section of the neighborhood are primarily single-story dwellings with several 1.5 and the occasional 2-story dwelling. The current configuration of the subject property is a side split with the second story on the south side of the dwelling. The built form is nearly identical to neighboring 29 Manor Road to the south. Only 29 Manor Road has a garage immediately below the second story. The subject lands have a carport attached to the north side of the dwelling. Shown here is a site plan of the proposal with the existing development shown on the left-hand side and the proposed addition shown on the right, along with the proposed garage and the expanded storage space shown in gray. As you can see, the proposed configuration runs parallel to the northern lot line, right along here. Note, no expansion to the driveway is proposed through this application. This slide illustrates the lot drainage and grading plan prepared based on the proposal as applied for. And shown here are the proposed elevations on the left. The proposed storage area contains a separate person door. The proposed front entrance canopy, which is the subject of relief number 2, does provide an aesthetic enhancement and assist in breaking up the face of the exterior of the property or of the dwelling. As you can see, we do have somewhat of a stepped approach as you travel towards the full second story that exists, as opposed to an entirely complete second story, which does assist in cutting down the massing and the built form of the overall proposal. Considering the need for storage, the roofline design does a serviceable job of maintaining a low profile and limits encroachment into the skyline in conformity with section 20.5.1 of the city's official plan, which pertains to the ability of a building to maintain a low profile and build in with the natural surroundings. The floor plan of the ground level is shown on the right-hand side. As you can see, we have the garage here, entrance door, and the proposed storage area shown here. The second level floor plan is shown here. So I'm going to show some slides which give an appreciation for the limited front yard that's present on the property. The location of the road allowance in relation to the location of the existing carport on the property, as well as the front entrance, restricts the number of parking spaces entirely contained on the property to one space. With no improvements or widening to the driveway, the garage will house one parking space, with the driveway accommodating a partial parking space. You can see the current carport on the left does an admirable job of housing a car, albeit a car that is low to the ground, and unlike the truck that's shown on the left, within the driveway. Many of the properties along Manor Road are deficient in terms of second parking spaces based on the residential zone category. Accommodating an additional parking space acknowledges the existing location of the driveway, which is partially within the municipal road allowance. There are no proposed modifications to the driveway as a result of this application. Any alterations to the driveway would require permissions through Realty Services as per direct correspondence with the division. As of this presentation, no comments were received from the roads division, which was circulated on the application. The owner has been made aware that an occupancy permit from the roads division may be required to facilitate parking in the absence of the comments from the roads division. The slide on the right shows the front yard of the dwelling. But it actually, it's deceiving in that the front property line actually bisects the lot, relegating the front yard just to be somewhat past the location of the garage, or sorry, the garden shown here. Based on information from the owner, it is understood that the fence that is shown here and in subsequent slides is easily removable, which the committee should take into consideration. The next few slides are shown to capture the variety of built form in the neighborhood. You can see the existing side split configuration of the subject property on the left, with the neighboring 23 Manor Road shown on the right to the north. You can see the carport in the far right, just sneaking into the photograph, again on the right. Noteworthy is the fact that a representative on behalf of the owner of 23 Manor Road is opposed to the application as applied for, which will be discussed later on in the presentation. The previously mentioned 29 Manor Road, with a reversed configuration to that of the subject lands, only with a garage below the second story shown on the left, as you can see here, and properties across the street are shown on the right-hand side, which is to the west of the subject lands. I will mention at this point in time that the owner of 29 Manor Road provided comments supporting the application. As the subject lands do not contain a backlot for additional parking, like some of the properties along Manor Road, the request for the reduced parking space, as mentioned previously, is appropriate from a planning perspective. As shown in the water yard of the property and the previous slides of the front yard of the subject lands, amenity space on this property is at a premium, with the rear yard patio, hot tub, and minimal manicured lawn transitioning to a riprap shoreline as shown in both slides, with the slide on the left taken facing south along the shoreline of Sturgeon Lake. Right here on the left, actually. Due to the size of the property, it is acknowledged by planning staff that outdoor storage space is required for various items, such as maintenance equipment or patio furniture, etc. As mentioned, the proposed design of the attached garage and storage area takes a stepped approach through gradually increasing into the newly proposed roof line. The new roof line will facilitate an expansion of attic storage, which planning staff have no objection to. Moreover, with the existing footprint of the carport set back approximately 10.4 meters and no encroachment towards the shoreline proposed, staff are of the opinion that the proposed reduced water yard setback is not exacerbated or impacted through this development. The manicured lawn, as shown on the left, albeit a small buffer, provides some level of infiltration between Sturgeon Lake and the extent of the development. These are just some additional photos taken of the adjacent properties, again, from the dock of the subject lands, with neighboring 29 Manor Road seen on the left, and again, neighboring 23 Manor Road and 21 Manor Road shown on the right. Committee, given the desirability and appropriateness test, as well as the test of the application being minor in nature, and the with respect to the impacts to the adjacent property identified as 23 Manor Road, and the inability of the proposal to meet the intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw, I find the application difficult to support. Reliefs 3 and 5 as applied for relating to the reduced minimum interior side yard setback from 1.3 meters to 0.3 meters and increase the maximum lot coverage from 30% to 47% respectfully cannot be supported. While staff can support reliefs 1, 2, and 4 as applied for, staff offer an alternative configuration of the garage, eliminating the triangular storage area as applied for, resulting in a reduced interior side yard setback of 0.36 meters, and for relief 3, a lot coverage of 44.3%. The staff recommendation is endorsed by the objecting neighbor and still provides for the garage and added storage in the proposed attic. This application provides an opportunity to achieve the greatest compliance with the zoning bylaw as is possible given the current footprint of the development. While the difference between 0.36 meters and 0.3 meters appears numerically negligible, an evaluation of the configuration of the development as proposed in comparison to the development without the triangular storage area is required. The 0.3 meter setback is proposed to run parallel to the side lot line for over 2/3 of the length of the garage. In comparison, the 0.36 meter setback only applies to the northeast corner of the garage. In order to perform maintenance on the majority of the northern wall of the garage, staff question whether sufficient room exists, and for example, can a ladder be safely erected without trespassing onto the neighboring lot to perform maintenance on the side of the proposed garage. Should a fence be erected, the functionality of the remaining yard area along the shared property line is also questioned. Staff understands 2 garage doors as proposed on opposite ends of the garage, as well as a person door on the storage area, will allow some mobility between the front and rear yards. However, a design without the triangular storage section would also enable access, as mentioned, to the majority of the north wall of the garage, lessening the requisite interior side yard relief, again, to 0.36 meters and decreasing the lot coverage to 44.3%. Before I show the side yard setbacks, I wanted to illustrate the location of the existing carport corner with the existing built form to the north of the lot, as well as the small existing storage area and where it is in relation to the vehicles present. So as you can see here on the slide on the right, here's the existing storage area in question. And you can see here's the front of the owner's truck, as well as the car that's parked underneath the carport. These slides illustrate the nature of the interior side yard in question, with planted skyrocket cedars delineating the approximate property boundary closer to the water on the left-hand side, with the side yard shown facing the water on the right. There is a survey stake near the northeast corner of the garage, and you can see it right here. Through enclosing the existing carport, the rear yard is rendered inaccessible with respect to larger machinery, gaining access for purposes of construction and repair to features such as the well, foundation, and shoreline, or the installation of a future holding tank for a septic system. While the owner has acknowledged alternative methods of gaining access to maintain and install the aforementioned features, future owners, should the property be sold, may not be as inclined to resort to such measures, or a license agreement, as is currently in place, may not be renewed. Moreover, through eliminating the storage space as proposed, accessibility to the vast majority of the northern garage wall, as mentioned, is enabled, and relief from the proposed northeast corner of the garage at 0.36 meters is more in line with the intent of the zoning bylaw. Many of the properties in the neighborhood attempt to maximize the lot area by having storage sheds against their respective dwellings within the interior side yards, as shown on both abutting properties. Access along the southern interior yard of the subject lot, as shown in the slide on the left, is impeded by existing propane tanks on the neighboring property, as well as a storage shed on the neighboring property, which makes use of the southern side yard for access egress and makes it difficult, particularly during emergencies. On the northern side, and as shown on the right-hand slide, the existing carport is already encroaching onto the neighboring lot to the north that also has a storage bin against its southern wall. Staff acknowledged the proposed garage will slightly improve the interior side yard setback to 0.3 meters. However, there is opportunity to further improve the spatial separation between the proposed garage and the interior side lot line. The intent behind the lot coverage provision is to maintain adequate landscaped open space for landscapability, accessibility, and amenity space. The current property is non-compliant at approximately 45.8%. Through constructing the garage and associated storage area, the total lot coverage amounts to approximately 46.2%. Close to half of the lot would be developed. While the proposal addresses stormwater infiltration through the lot drainage and grading plan, accessibility as shown, as well as providing for lands for service expansion or relocation is further diminished. The staff recommendation of approximately 44.3% removes the proposed storage area and represents an overall reduction in lot coverage while still providing for development in the form of the attached garage and storage through the additional attic space. Comments were received from the following. The plans examiner of the Building and Septic Division had no objections. However, the proximity of the proposal will require compensating construction to comply with the requirements of the spatial separation requirements of the Ontario Building Code. The supervisor of Part 8 sewage systems of the Building and Septic Division comments that a site visit was conducted to review the position of the Class 5 holding tank. Currently, the Class 5 holding tanks are positioned within the municipal boundary. However, the tanks are protected and accessible for maintenance. Due to the location of the drilled well serving the property and the proximity of the lake, there's limited ability to relocate the tanks on this property. It's understood the owners have obtained a license agreement with respect to the placement of the holding tanks. Should a contract not be provided, the owner will need to submit an application for a sewage system permit to the Building and Septic Division to replace the Class 5 holding tanks within their property boundaries. The supervisor of Development Engineering Division stated that from an engineering perspective, there are no objections to the proposed minor variance. As per engineering comments earlier this year, they would be in favor of maintaining a distance of separation or a buffer between the subject property and the adjacent property to the north. However, drainage is being contained on the property and not negatively impacting the adjacent property. Public comments in support of the application, as applied for, were received from the following. Sheila and Alan Kroom of 14 Manor Road, dated October 6th to 2021. Sharon Worsley of 21 Manor Road, dated October 6th and 7th, 2021. Ken and Gail House of 73 Manor Road, dated October 7th, 2021. Joan Crossley of 28 Manor Road, dated October 10th, 2021. Ronald and Carol Such of 29 Manor Road, as mentioned, dated October 18th, 2021. And finally, Christine Armour of 31 Manor Road, dated October 20th, 2021. Public comments objecting to the reliefs requested through the application were submitted by Jack Sharp on behalf of Jim Butler at 23 Manor Road, and those comments were dated August 18th, 2021. Mr. Sharp provided a letter of opposition expressing concerns with respect to the proposed side yard relief. Please refer to Appendix F of the report for the associated documentation. Mr. Sharp did agree to the proposed alternative recommendations put forth by planning staff as they pertain directly to the side yard relief requested. Based on the contents of the report, staff respectfully recommends the following, subject to the conditions in the report. That reliefs 3 and 5 sought for the garage addition in this minor variance application is not minor in nature, desirable and appropriate for the use of the land, or in keeping with the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw, and should be recommended for denial. In addition, 0.36 meters for relief 3 and 44.3% for relief 5, as well as the requested reliefs 1, 2, and 4 of this minor variance application be granted, subject to the conditions of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stainton. Well, where do we start with this one? All right, committee members, are there any questions of the planner? What's that? Was a bit of a story. Mr. Mars, you got a question? Anyone else with a question? Yeah, Mr. Richardson, go.
Through you, in the applicant's submission, he notes that there's a deeded easement on the neighboring property. And I'm just wondering, could you point out where this easement is? And is there anything on the property that would impede the backlot people from accessing the waterfront?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I am aware of a potential easement on the neighboring property addressed as 23 Manor Road to the north. However, the nature and details of said easement are unknown to planning staff at this time. What I can confirm is that the subject property is not subject to said easement mentioned by Member Richardson.
Ms. Richardson, follow up? Anything further from committee members? Mrs. Archer, go ahead.
Through you, please, to Mr. Stainton. On Appendix C, there's a dotted line that's referred to as property line. Is that actually the line of where the property is?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. That is the actual property line, the front property line of the subject lands.
Well, then in that case, why are we not, or are we, am I missing it, requesting a variance because the new garage will be too close to the front property line?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is because the new canopy is actually closer than the new garage proposed at 0.05 meters from the front property line.
So because it works with the whole of the house, not just the easement, or not just the canopy, is that correct?
Yes, and because the canopy, through you, Mr. Chair, because the canopy is connected to the house, that is the closest point. Therefore, the relief is being sought from that.
Anything further from committee? Right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application?
Yes. Ourselves and our architect who filed this application for us, Glenn Wilcox, we're both here. Glenn, did you want to speak first?
As I asked in the startup, please give us your name before you start speaking, okay? Go ahead, sir. We can't hear you, sir.
Sorry,
Yeah,
didn't turn on. I'm Glenn Wilcox. I'm an architect and I'm also the agent for the applicant in this matter. Further to the issues that we raised previously with the committee and here, we do want to have the storage extended to that side of the property. And we would argue for that it is very minor in nature, that the coverage is only changing marginally through this application. It's all very well to have a garage, but if you can't store anything in it because it's too small, it can only contain one car. So that is part of the reason for asking for that extension. We're certainly aware that the construction requirements of that wall are going to have to be non-combustible in nature to meet the requirements of the building code, but that shouldn't be an issue. It's been illustrated that the drainage will not be impacted, and a surveyor has provided a grading plan to achieve that along there. So really that storage is necessary to the complete application, and we would like that to stay as part of it. I know that there were a lot of letters for support from the area into there, and that was noted, but also the letter of opposition and made some erroneous statements that this proposal would actually place the new addition over top of the property line, and that is clearly not the case. It's very clear on the documentation provided both in the site plan and the plans that the overhangs and the walls will not project beyond that property line whatsoever. So I just wanted to be clear about that. So I think it is minor in nature and that it is in keeping with the other structures in this area, as the planner indicated earlier. So I'm not sure if the owner had something to add to that, and I'm certainly prepared to answer any questions from committee.
All right, does the owner have anything to add to that?
Yes, I would. And just referring to a few statements that Mr. Stainton made. It says in the application that we're going from 30 to 47% coverage of our property. And that actually is not true. It's existing coverage, I believe, is 45.8. And we're requesting to basically take an existing storage compartment. It's been there since 1963, if my information from Mr. Stainton's correct. That storage compartment's been there. We're taking our existing structure, improving it, putting an eaves trough where there wasn't one, managing any runoff, any water. As Mr. Wilcox just said, where we are currently touching the property line, both where the storage compartment is and where the northeast corner of the garage is. Both those corners are touching on the property line. We will be back from the property line the entire length of that storage compartment. And so we're going from 45.8% current coverage to 46.2, which is 0.4% difference from what is existing. I would call that minor, but I would also say that's minor. Having said that, having that storage compartment is a major issue for us. That's why we're having this long conversation. And as has been already explained, both by Mr. Stainton and Mr. Wilcox, is you need a storage compartment for lawnmower, snow blower, garbage pails, that if we lose that space, it's critical to us. I'm also going to mention, you talked about getting larger equipment into our backyard. Right now, because of the carport, the existing structure we have limits any type of equipment going to the backyard. When we change this garage over, we're going to have full width garage doors on both the lakeside and the roadside. We're going to have it full height so that there is smaller machineries now that can come through. A pickup truck could back through, which right now cannot happen. Number two, the property adjacent to us, number 29, has an aluminum storage shed and a propane tank there. That space between our two buildings is 8 feet wide. And if we were, as you said, Mr. Stainton, we had an emergency situation where we had to get something back in there to fix our well or do something, we could arrange very easily to have access through there. And the third thing I'll mention to you is the subject of an easement, not on our property, nothing to do with us, but the easement is on the adjacent property, number 23. And that's coincidentally the same person that sent the letter in saying he did not want this storage compartment. That's the same person who is supposed to be managing an easement to allow his deeded access from neighbors across the street. It's got nothing to do with us, but just recently we were on a trip in Scotland for a wedding, and we got a phone call from both that owner as well as Young's Construction asking if he could drive across our property to get access down that side yard, which if he didn't have a shower basin and gravel and all kinds of stuff in the way, he could easily access his own backyard. So I think there's enough evidence here to substantiate the fact that this is a minor thing we're asking for, but it's got a major effect on our overall use of the property. I believe I've covered what I wanted to. Thank you for the time.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Stainton, do you wish to respond to any of the comments made?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the only comment that I had was with respect to the relief from the lot coverage component. The reason it's 30% is because that is the requirement of the RR3 zone. It's not necessarily the existing coverage of the property. And I do acknowledge Mr. Campkin's claim that the coverage is currently, I believe, 45.8%. I will acknowledge that, but I just wanted to provide clarity there that the reason we're going from 30 to 45.8 is because that is the requirement within the zoning bylaw and not necessarily what is present on the ground. Other than that, I have no additional comments.
All right, thank you for that. Are there questions to the applicant or the planner? Mr. Marsh, go ahead.
I'm just trying to put this all together in my head again.
Good luck.
I just want to walk through this a little bit. So really what this comes down to, we're agreeable on everything other than this little storage unit, correct? So we're agreeable to everything other than the storage. That's really what it's coming down to. Is that correct? And
Mr. Stainton, is that correct?
Is that directed to me? If that's directed to me, yes.
okay, and
That's
are
all
you
we were
proposing that
talking
no storage, or are you saying the existing storage layout's okay, but the triangular one's no good?
Through you, Mr. Chair, what I am saying is that in addition to providing the attic storage, the alternative proposal for the garage combined with the attic proposal is what achieves the equivalent storage, I guess you could say. This isn't meant to be punitive in terms of taking away what exists. And the 0.36 meter setback is based on the northeast corner and the lot line running not parallel to, but essentially on an angle to the existing lot line, achieving that setback.
Okay, so if we look at Appendix C,
Correct.
You're saying you're okay with the new garage, and if we look at the top sketch, the existing, you're saying the storage can stay, but not, you can't have the whole triangular thing.
What I'm, through you, Mr. Chair, what I'm saying is this is an opportunity to achieve a greater setback from the zoning bylaw.
So
and hence what we should be doing is constructing the garage in a rectangular fashion.
Okay, so that's the thing I'm looking for. Now I'd like to go to the architect, Mr. Wilcox. So how important is the triangular versus what's existing? Like how much
Well,
more?
what's existing-
It's hard to tell. Like the storage that's there, roughly, what size is it? Depth and.
I'm just gonna look at it here now. It's probably about maybe 2 feet by 8 feet or something like that,
And you're
beyond the
looking to
carport
then,
edge.
you're looking at extending the one end to likely 3.5 feet?
Yeah,
Okay.
to follow the property line and be away from that edge into there. But you can see that, that the garage, as proposed, which is largely the same size as the carport, once you put a car in there, there's not room for anything else.
Right. No, that's what I'm
So
saying.
the-
I guess,
everybody,
how important it is to have the triangular storage versus what's existing? I'm putting you on the
Well, I guess
spot
we
a
thought
little
that
bit.
having the triangular storage was actually a better use of the space. Because right now, that corner of the existing storage is pretty much touching the property line. And what happens now too is that the entire carport roof drains to that property line. So in the new layout as proposed, we've turned the roof the other way so that the roof goes to the street and goes to the lake. The only piece that's draining towards the property is the triangular storage area, which is going to be picked up by an eaves trough and downspouts, and it is graded to accommodate that into there. So you're kind of looking at this saying, those little triangles that are left beside the existing storage area, what purpose could they probably achieve? Really nothing when you think about it. So, you know, again, back to, you know, you've got a lawnmower, you've got all these things that you have to put there. If you don't put there, they're going to be on the property somewhere.
So,
And then you're going to get complaints from the neighbors saying there's stuff all
Right.
over the property and more storage, you know. So I think this is trying to rationalize that to say that we must provide for the parking for the car, as illustrated previously.
so
And we can't put a lawnmower in an attic, you know, and things like that. It's got to be somewhere.
okay. No, that's fine. That answers my question. Thank you.
Further questions of the applicant or the planner? Mr. Strangway, go ahead.
Thank excuse me, thank you. Question through to Mr. Wilcox. I'm well aware of the property constraints in this area. Was there any consideration given to moving the storage to the lake side of the garage and simply extending the length of the garage? Would that provide the storage? Was there any thought given to that?
In response, that's a very good observation, actually, but it would preclude the sort of through access that Brad talked about earlier. I mean, the whole purpose is having a garage door at either end. You can get it back into there. So if you put that storage at the back, it's going to stop that. And here's another thing is that it's going to impede the open space at the back of the property even more through that approach into there. So here we're taking a triangular piece of property to the side that really holds no other purpose, that you can't even change your mind in. It's so small over there that, you know, you use that for the storage and you allow the through to access, and then you maximize the open space area that remains to the lake for people to enjoy.
I understand you fully now that you mentioned that door. Thank you.
All right, anything further from committee members to the applicant or to the planner? Excuse me. Thank you very much for that, folks. Now I'll ask, is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application, in support of the application? Oh, I see your name, sir. Oh, who is it? No, all right. Anyone in support of the application? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application. Mr. Stainton, I'm going to ask you, you've heard some of the comments back and forth. Do you have anything further to add? This is a rather involved thing, so I want to make sure we've covered all the bases. So do you have anything to add as to what's been said?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the only thing I wanted to add was in response to Mr. Strangway's or Member Strangway's comments. I too considered the moving the garage or extending that garage to the east, but the comments that Mr. Wilcox brought forth were the rationale behind me not recommending additional space be placed there as well. So that was considered by planning staff as well.
All right. Mr. Marsh? Go ahead.
I'll move that the application be supported as applied for. Speak to it with a second.
Do I have a seconder? Ms. Richardson? All right. Do you want to speak to it, Mr. Marsh?
Yeah. I thank Mr. Stanton, and I also, both parties, I mean, you've given us all the information, and I truly believe if we're going with a variance, we may as well make it to the best use. And I feel by having the storage, it's better than not having it and having a bunch of junk piled up beside the building. It's a better overall approach, and I do agree also it's very minor in nature, so I support it.
Ms. Richardson? Do it. Anyone else? Yeah.
I thank Mr. Marsh for that motion. I agree with it 100%. I'm well aware of the constraints with these properties. They're a unique situation down there on Manor Road on very small lots. And one of the worst things you want to see is stuff piled outside the houses. I think it's, as Mr. Wilcox said, it's an opportunity to make full use of the lot. It's a slight percentage increase of the covered space, but I think it makes sense and I support it.
Anything further from the committee? All right, this is rather unorthodox, but Mr. Stainton, I'm going to ask you and perhaps the acting manager as well, given the fact that the motion on the floor has to do with the application as originally applied for, I'd appreciate your comments or the acting managers.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is an alternative resolution that is prepared, which essentially acknowledges the application as applied for. If you wish, I could read out the conditions for you.
Please do. Let's cover the bases.
Okay. So the resolution would state as follows. That minor variance application D20 2021-038 be granted as the application meets the tests set out in section 45(1) of the Planning Act with the following conditions. 1, that the building construction related to this approval shall proceed substantially in accordance with the sketch in appendices C to D and generally in accordance with Appendix E submitted as part of report COA 2021-076, which shall be attached to and form part of the committee's decision. And 2, that the building construction related to the minor variance for the detached garage that should read the attached garage and addition shall be completed within a period of 24 months after the date of notice of decision, failing which the variance pertaining to the addition shall be deemed to be refused. This condition will be considered fulfilled upon completion of the first building inspection.
Acceptable to the, are there questions from the architect and the applicant?
Where I'm going. Mr. Wilcox, you've heard what was said there. Is that acceptable to you and your clients?
I don't see any issue with that either. Would you, Brad?
It's just, I apologize for, I'm having to digest this information. Mr. Stainton referred to Appendix C and D, I believe, and what he's saying is if we build it as per these drawings within 24 months, he's agreeable, correct?
That's what I'm
And
hearing.
we are agreeable.
Yes, that's what I'm hearing. You're okay with that?
Agreeable with that, thank you. Yep.
Was it any,
So I just need to clarify,
was it any?
based on what we've applied for, then Mr. Stainton's saying if we build it as per what we planned for here, there is no changes to our request. Is that correct?
Mr. Stainton?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that is correct. The proposal would go ahead as applied for and not based on the recommendations of staff.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
All right. Okay, looks you're on the right track,
That's fine.
Mr.
So do you
Marsh.
want me to withdraw the first motion and, so I'll withdraw the first motion, supported the seconder.
Well, that's exactly why I asked, so, because I had a feeling.
Now I will move as spelled out by, yes.
Okay with that? Is the committee okay with that? Do you understand where we're going, Mr. Strangway?
Just one question here. We asked for those in support. Did we ask for anybody opposed to it, or do we still have to do that?
Oh, that was absolutely done, sir.
Okay, I'll try.
Or
and keep up-
questioning.
I'll try and keep up with the plan then.
Yeah, no,
Thanks.
I asked for both.
Okay.
All right. Is everyone clear in the committee as to where we're going? All right. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. And thank you very much, folks, for taking the time, and we appreciate your comments.
Thanks.
Yeah. Moving, I wish I could say moving right along, but anyway, we're dealing now with file number D20-2021-046, and this is 12 Lorraine Drive, Geographic Township of Manvers. And Mr. Harding, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee. Just let me get my share screen up here. There we are. So this application proposes to permit a pool within the rear yard. This pool would be closer to the abutting road, being Aaron Drive, than is required, and to recognize a shed abutting the rear wall of the attached garage. So the subject property is within a residential neighborhood in the southern area of Bethany. The lot is a corner lot with frontage on Lorraine Drive and Aaron Drive. As we can see here, the house is set back from Aaron Drive. It does face onto Lorraine. So there's a lot of lawn between the northern face of the dwelling and Aaron Drive, and that is within the area that the pool is proposed. The application does meet the 4 tests for minor variance. I'll go along to the next slide here so you can see where the pool is proposed in blue. So the property is zoned rural residential type 1 zone within our Oakers Marine zoning bylaw. So while the pool is proposed closer to Aaron Drive than is currently permitted, this yard is fenced, as could be seen on that aerial photograph before. So there's already a great degree of privacy in that division between the Aaron Drive kind of road frontage, if you will, and the more private rear yard space of the subject parcel. And I'll get into some photographs as well. So here I'm looking at the subject parcel in both images here, and then the image more on the right hand side, we can see that fenced area behind where the pool is proposed. So there's not a lot of vegetation aside from the fencing in the northern and western areas of the rear yard, but the eastern side, we can see we've got a long spruce tree vegetated buffer there, which does screen the backyard quite well from that side. Seen also on the image to the left, we've got that spruce tree buffer as well, and then the subject parcel and the fence there with where the pool's proposed to the immediate right of that. And then I've basically gone right through that fence in the next image, and I'm looking at the rear yard proper of the dwelling. So it's still quite a large amenity space in the backyard, but everything on the left side of that photograph, being the southern portion of the rear yard, is where the septic system is, which precludes the placement of the pool in that area. So as we can see, this lawn area to the north of the dwelling is basically otherwise unused in terms of amenity space. It is just lawn at this point, so it's basically underutilized. And here we have on the left another image of the rear yard, this time looking more towards the northeast. So this is this general area where the pool is proposed again. We've got an inflatable pool in the general vicinity of where the new one is proposed. And then the image on the right shows us the storage shed, which abuts the back of the attached garage. So as we can see here, there's also a person door that provides access between the garage and the rear yard. So this is also a very ideal clustering of storage uses. So you've got storage space within the garage, and then the storage space within the shed that complements that storage function of the garage, pairing quite nicely together. That shed, as we can see, is also situated well away from the lot line, so that's not going to impact any lot grading or drainage issues with respect to placement of that shed. So this property is within the rural settlement designation of our Oak Ridges Marine Policy Area document of our official plan. And of course, low density residential uses such as is established on this parcel, and accessory residential uses to that are permitted within this designation. Staff does respectfully recommend that the application be granted subject to the conditions identified in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you, sir. Any questions of the planner? All right, being none. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application?
Yes, I do.
And your name, please?
Hi, my name is Marnie Saunders. I am a land use planner for DM Wills in Peterborough, and I'm representing the landowners, Brenda and Steve Alderton, who are the landowners of 12 Lorraine Drive. As Mr. Harding has presented, our clients are proposing a swimming pool in their rear yard, which also is within the required flankage yard. So we're requesting a reduced setback for that flankage yard from 15 meters to 3.6 meters. As explained, there's not going to be any impact to the surrounding area, as this yard is already completely fenced in and has an existing visual barrier. There's an existing shed in the property as well, which has been noted that it's been constructed without a setback to the main building. So we're also requesting that reduced or lack of setback be recognized through the variance application as well. We have reviewed the report and conclusions and recommendations drawn by planning staff, and we agree with their recommendations, with the exception of condition number 2, with regards to the timing for the construction of the pool being done within 24 months. While we understand why these timelines are imposed in order to ensure that construction occurs within a timely manner, we don't feel that it is appropriate in this case, as the construction of the pool will not have an impact on any of the surrounding area or the public, and therefore the timing of the construction will not have an impact either. The client has also been in talks with pool contractors, and just due to the sheer demand of pools due to the climate that we're living in and the changing preferences of where to live due to COVID and things like that, the demand for pools is skyrocketed, and the contractors are warning people that it could be several summers before they can actually get out to do the construction. So we're asking that this condition either be removed or extended to a period of 60 months or 5 years to ensure that the client or landowner, our client and landowner, has sufficient time to have the pool constructed and doesn't lose the approval for this variance. Otherwise, we agree with all the other conditions and recommendations from staff. That's all.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Saunders. And now I move over to Mr. Harding. How does that, you've heard the suggestion that it be extended to 5 years from 24 months. Where are you with that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 5 years is a pretty substantial deviation from what we've been dealing with. I do understand that there is a delay and very difficult time getting a hold of contractors. My understanding right now is that the pool could be constructed around the time of summer 2023, but staff does understand that there might need to be a buffer to that. So we're definitely supportive of adding on an additional year, perhaps year and a half. So in the range of perhaps 40 months if committee is willing, but we will leave that in committee's capable hands.
Well, thank you very much for that. You've heard what he's had to say there. I think that's a reasonable suggestion, 40 months.
Yeah, as I said, we just don't want to get in a situation where in the event that something happens or there's a delay in the construction that we're bringing this application back before the committee. As I said, and in this situation where there's a consent or construction of a new addition or a garage, it seems appropriate to have that time in place. But in this case, it just doesn't seem that appropriate. The construction or the timing of the construction of the pool is not going to have any impact on anyone other than the landowner.
All right, you made your point. Thank you. Right. Committee, questions?
quick one. Are we required to put a time limit? That's a courtesy.
To Mr. Harding? Mr. Harding, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, it's my understanding that this has been the municipality's approach to development to make sure that development applications that committee actually approves are followed through with within a reasonable amount of time.
It's not part of the Planning Act. It's not required. We've had this debate once before. It's basically, I'm fine with it, but I don't think it's not even required, is it not?
Mr. Harding, the question is it required under the Planning Act timeframe?
Mr. Chair, I see the manager of planning put up her hand in the camera view that I saw there. So I'd like to defer to Ms. Berry if I can.
Yes, Ms. Berry, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see you there.
Not a problem, which is amazing considering we are several feet apart and David is miles away. Yeah, it's a great question.
He's not nearly as busy as I am, see? Go ahead, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Member Marsh, it's a great question. You're correct. The Planning Act doesn't have a specific time frame whatsoever. In agreement with David, the municipality certainly has demonstrated some latitude with minimums, certainly less than 24 months and more than 24 months as well. If I could take this opportunity to also just remind the committee that should the zoning bylaw ever be repealed and replaced with a new zoning bylaw, the decision of the committee would be moot unless it was changed over as a site-specific zoning amendment in the new bylaw. So this is, I hope, valuable information to you to keep in mind when making these decisions, understanding that the Planning Division is working on a two-stage program for consolidating the zoning bylaws. We are currently in the middle of the rural zoning bylaw comprehensive update. Phase 2 of that is the urban zoning bylaw comprehensive update. So although it's a dim light at the end of the tunnel, there is one. And so we do see at some point in the future there being a new bylaw regulating use of lands in urban zones like this one. So the longer out the conditions are allowed to last, the potential implications there are with losing the development rights that the committee's decision affords.
I totally agree with you.
Quickly, what about the Oak? This is in the Oak Ridges Moraine, though. That's not under review is it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's not under the current review. Not all of the 13 zoning bylaws that are in the rural zoning bylaw in the comprehensive rural zoning bylaw update isn't including the ORM.
Just a comment, if I may, under no circumstances would I support a condition that is left open-ended. So I'd like to make everyone clear on that. Mr. Archer, go ahead.
If we extend it to, say, it was saying 40 months instead of the 36, the extra few months added on are going to be through the winter months, so that's not going to be help much for a pool. So it should be 48 in my opinion.
Go ahead. Saw your hand, believe it or not.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, from a little bit away, so thank you for that. So please bear in mind, committee, that right now we're in late autumn really for decision making. So the standard 2-year sunset clause would expire at the winter of 2023. So going with 40 months would actually set out that deadline for them to get their first building inspection for the pool at July of 2025.
Thank you.
So just to put that in perspective.
Yeah.
That's what 40 months would look like.
Yes, thank you for that. All right. Are there any further questions of the planner or the applicant or the applicant's representative? All right. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application, in support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to the application? Mr. Marsh.
Support the application with the amendment of 48 months. It just rounds it off.
Do I have a seconder? Mrs. Archer? All right. Do you wish to speak to it, Mr. Marsh? Mrs. Archer? No. All right. Any further comments or questions with respect to it? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. All right. Moving right along, we're now dealing with file number D20-2021-048. And this is 2220 Elm Tree Road, Township of Fenelon, Ward 3. And you've been supplied committee with a memorandum by Mr. Stainton with respect to a deferral. And Mr. Stainton, would you care to speak to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if acceptable by you, I wish to just move the memorandum for deferral ahead for a decision for the sake of time.
The only problem I have with that is if there is someone online, and I don't know now that there is, that hasn't viewed this, there may very well be questions, so I think we should deal with the entire thing.
Through you, Mr. Chair, fair enough. On October 7th, 2021, the above referenced application, which is 2220 Elm Tree Road, was circulated. The application is requesting relief from section 3.1.2.1 of the Township of Fenelon zoning bylaw, number 12-95, in order to construct a new accessory residential unit, which is not part of the main building, within the front yard of the subject lands. The property is adjacent to McLaren Creek, which traverses the western portion of the property. An environmental protection exception 1 or EP-1 zone category follows the creek and the floodplain associated with the watercourse. The creek is also designated environmental protection in the City of Kawartha Lakes official plan. On October 12th, upon conducting analysis associated with the preparation of the report, planning staff noticed discrepancies in the location of the regulatory floodplain from reviewing the approximate regulated limit, or ARL, mapping available to planning staff. When compared to the detailed flood mapping prepared by Kawartha Conservation as part of the McLaren's Creek floodplain mapping study, which was prepared and adopted in April 2021, the extent of the floodplain hazard depicted in the study was more extensive, with both the location of the driveway and potentially the location of the ARU being within the hazard. In addition to the recently adopted zoning bylaw amendments authorizing ARUs within the City of Kawartha Lakes, which prohibit the ARUs or the location of ARUs within floodplains, Section 3.18.1.1 of the Township of Fenelon zoning bylaw requires an additional 15-meter setback from any class of environmental protection zone, which includes the EP1 zone. Without a topographic survey of the area illustrating the precise elevation and location of the regulatory flood elevation, the location of the ARU, again, may have been within the flood hazard, or the proposal would have required an additional relief under section 3.18.1.1 of the zoning bylaw, requiring the application to be re-advertised and recirculated. Through receipt of comments from Kawartha Conservation and subsequent conversations with its staff members, planning staff determined that in lieu of the provision of elevation measurements, revisions to the existing site plan by relocating the ARU further to the east and utilizing the existing driveway running parallel to and outside the flood elevation would result in the development being entirely outside of lands regulated by Kawartha Conservation and in conformity with the zoning bylaw. The information was promptly conveyed to the applicant, who has agreed to revise the proposal based on the aforementioned requirements. However, once the revisions to the proposal were made and submitted, the deadline had passed for the subsequent review and submission of the report. As the application has been advertised, planning staff recommend the application be deferred to no later than the November 25th, 2021 meeting. As the revisions are minor, risk is mitigated, and no additional reliefs are required, the application does not require re-advertisement, and the application may be brought back to the committee ahead of that time. Planning staff is requesting to the committee to consider deferring the application for a period of not more than 2 months, returning at the latest to the November 25th, 2021 meeting. Thank you.
All right. Before I ask for a motion, are there any questions or comments regarding the memorandum from committee members? All right, being none, do I have a motion then? Mrs. Archer? Deferred as recommended, coming back no later than November the 25th. All right, do I have a seconder? Mr. Richardson? All right, the only thing to debate on these is the time frame, and I think we've identified that. So everyone in favor of the deferral? Opposed? The deferral carries. Moving right along, we are dealing with file number D20-2021-049. Location is 855 Post Road, Geographic Township of Ops. And before I ask you to start, Mr. Stainton, I want to compliment you on your handling of that deferral motion. You articulated it very well, and you responded directly and towards any questions or responses from others. So a job very well done, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to confirm that I'm sharing my screen. Oh yeah, it looks like it. I am. That's good. So the purpose and effect of this application is to request relief from section 5.2 to reduce the minimum lot frontage requirement from 38 meters to 13 meters in order to fulfill a condition of provisional consent associated with a surplus farm dwelling severance and farm consolidation as part of consent file D03-2020-012. On July 9th, 2021, the Acting Director of Development Services, as delegated by Council, granted provisional consent for file D03-2020-012 to sever an approximately 0.557 hectare parcel of land containing a dwelling addressed as 855 Post Road and retain approximately 32.26 hectares of agricultural lands. The retained agricultural lands will be consolidated with an abutting farm operation to the north, identified as part of Lot 15, Concession 8, Geographic Township of Ops. The applicant has agreed to the conditions of the staff recommendation. I would like to point out an error in the report within the background section on page 2 in the first paragraph carried over from the previous page, which should read the resultant severed lands are approximately 0.56 hectares in size. Through review of the consent application, it was determined that the severed parcel, the proposed severed parcel, does not meet the minimum lot frontage requirements of the zoning bylaw. Condition 2 of the provisional consent approval requires a variance for the subject land such that relief from the minimum lot frontage provision is recognized. There is no construction proposed through this application. The subject property is located in a rural area southeast of the town of Lindsay. The community is comprised predominantly of agricultural lots with some rural residential lots to the northeast and southeast. The existing property is also bordered by the Victoria County Rail Trail running on an angle to the southwest. Excuse me. This specific parcel contains farmland under production with a proposed flag lake configuration to be shown on the subsequent slide of the lot proposed through the associated consent application, demarcated primarily by a wooden fence. So as you'll see on the subsequent slide, the flag lake configuration kind of follows the property up the laneway here before jutting out into a square-like configuration and then again back down the laneway. As shown in the art plan and sketch for severance on the next slide, the lot configuration was adopted in order to keep as much of the agricultural lands on the retained as possible. A livestock barn to the north of the dwelling, formerly on the retained lands, was removed as a condition of provisional consent. You can see the 13 meters of frontage, or you can squint and try to see it, actually shown right here. And again here, with the barn that was referenced removed just north of the word severed here. From evaluating several of the parcels in the neighborhood, it appears rural severances and farm consolidations have been commonplace over time. The reduction in lot frontage will be imperceptible given the dwelling is located approximately 150 meters from Post Road. The photo on the left shows Post Road and the subject frontage looking northward, with the photo on the right showing the proposed frontage looking along Post Road to the south. A single attached dwelling with a two-car garage constructed in 1905, according to MPAC, is located on the proposed severed parcel with a walkout deck to the south. The photo on the left shows the dwelling with the two-car garage facing southwest, with the photo on the right illustrating the dwelling and attached deck looking to the northeast on the opposite side of the house. The purposes of the minimum lot frontage requirement are to ensure the parcel is wide enough to support a dwelling, well, and septic system through creating adequate spatial separation while maintaining appropriate setbacks from the lot boundaries. Moreover, the lot frontage requirement ensures buildings and structures do not dominate the parcel in terms of massing and lot coverage. Through spreading out development, adequate accessibility and lot drainage can also be maintained. The photo on the left was taken from Post Road looking to the west and illustrates the wooden fence demarcating the proposed severed parcel boundary with the barn that was decommissioned on the right, as the photos were taken prior to the notice of decision for the consent application. The photo on the right shows the property to the east on the opposite side of Post Road. The land will continue to function in a manner that it has historically been functioning. In fact, given the presence of the wooden fence, the perception that the land already functions as an individual rural residential lot may exist. The effect of the consent application will allow for separate ownership of the lands. The retained agricultural land will be consolidated with the abutting farm operation to the southwest, while the dwelling on the land to be severed is considered surplus to the farm operation. Again, just some photos illustrating the laneway as part of the proposed severed lands, which were taken facing westward on the left. So you can see again the barn and the dwelling on the left, and down the laneway to the east on the right-hand side. Comments were received from Engineering and Corporate Assets Division and Building and Septic Division, stating that they have no concerns with the proposal as review was conducted as part of the consent application review. Based on the contents of the report, staff acknowledges the application meets all four tests of a minor variance, and staff respectfully recommends approval of the application subject to the condition identified within the report. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions of the planner? Ms. Archer.
Thank you. Through you to the planner. On the consent letter that was issued by the city, the condition number 1, it refers to the survey dated March 23rd, but there seems to have been a second survey dated, I think it's August. What was the purpose of that? It seems to be a bit different shape, so is there a problem with that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there were some discrepancies identified through the consent application that resulted in a further refinement of the lot boundary to more of the, we'll say, flag-like configuration that it is today, and also to achieve separation from a metal-clad building that is actually located to the west of the subject lands.
Ms. Archer, follow-up?
So even though the consent refers to the one survey, they're going to be using a different survey? Will that not cause a problem?
Mr. Stain?
Through you, Mr. Chair, No, because our plan actually had to be prepared and submitted to the Secretary Treasurer. So it was actually the first staff recommendation was actually revised and should reflect more our plan that is provided.
Follow up? Mr. Marsh?
So, application was made, we have the letter from the city, but then it was revised, but we never got copied of that. The application itself was revised?
Oh, through you, Mr. Chair, the notice of staff recommendation was revised. The application itself was not revised. There were conditions within the staff recommendation that were altered. And as a result, the issuance of a subsequent staff recommendation had to be done.
We never got a copy of that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, a copy of the revised staff recommendation?
Is that a question, Mr. Marsh?
We're missing something, but I'm not sure what. And then you mentioned a steel-clad building. Is there a steel-clad building on the property?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, that is on the retained lands to the west. I can actually show you, hold on. Let's share my screen. So as you can see here, there's this building here remained on the retained agricultural lands. With the barn that was decommissioned immediately above the word severed.
One other question is, and again, I don't understand. So I realize these surplus buildings are, but it doesn't comply to our policy without the variance. So technically, to me, I question that in itself. But rather than do the variance to narrow down the frontage, which planners generally don't like, if this was a severance that someone had applied for separately as a severance, you wouldn't be overly supportive of something with a 13-meter entrance into that parcel, I don't believe.
Is that a question, Mr. Marsh?
Well, my question is, why are we not squaring the property up, making it a rectangle, and doing a variance for the size, the oversize?
Yep. Through you, Mr. Chair, the reason there is a flag configuration, as I mentioned in the report and in the presentation, is to preserve as much agricultural land as possible. The lands are designated as prime agricultural lands, and as such, the amount of lands required to, I guess we want to retain as much agricultural land as possible. And so that is why the flag-like configuration was chosen. And as a result of the severance as a condition, the requirement for the reduced lot frontage was required. The severed parcel meets the minimum lot area requirements. However, it doesn't meet the lot frontage requirements given the configuration. This is a common practice that the planning division oversees. And this is essentially a routine farm consolidation severance.
Anything further from committee? Richard?
Through you, please. In one of the sketches we have, it says, I think, the red-clad building is to be removed, but you said decommissioned. Yeah, are they the same thing?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes. It was decommissioned, and there was a condition imposed through the provisional consent to have the barn essentially demolished. And proof of that demolition has been provided by the applicant.
Anything further from committee? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? And, oh, Mr. Carroll, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members, staff. We've reviewed the report and we accept the recommendation and the proposed condition. If you have additional questions with respect to the necessity of the flag-shaped lot with respect to agricultural lands that are already tile drained, and the removal of the metal-clad pole frame building from the proposed lot, retaining it with the agricultural lot, I'm happy to answer your questions or any other ones. Thank you.
And thank you for that. Are there any questions of Mr. Carroll? All right. Thank you, Mr. Carroll, for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Carrying on, is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of this application? Anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? Committee? Strangway, as printed?
As printed.
All right, and seconded by Councillor Yeo. Further comments or questions? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Application. All right, moving right along. We're now dealing with file number D20-2021-058, and this is vacant lot, Sunset View Road and Shadow Lake Road number 4, Geographic Township of Somerville, Ward 1. Go ahead, Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this application proposes to permit development within the rural general or RG zone by recognizing the private access to the property. So as we can see here on the overview map, we've got a Sunset View Road in this teal color, which runs through the front portion of the parcel. Just advance the slide here. Need to stop, or I need to shift my share screen for a moment. There we go. So we can see Sunset View Road runs through the front of this parcel here, and this parcel has what I'm going to classify as a bow tie type shape, even though it is very lopsided towards the eastern side. So we've got this western section of the bow tie, which is zoned LSR, which is consistent with the other shoreline residential lots along the eastern side of Shadow Lake, which recognizes the private road access and development is permitted as a right for a house in this area. And then we have the back portion, which is zoned rural general. The rural general zone category only permits development if access to the lot is by a municipally improved street. So in this case, access and development is permitted on the parcel in the LSR zone, and the RG zone does allow for development. We'll get into that a little bit later. It's just the nature of the access in the back parcel is a little bit different. So as I've identified in my brief overview already, so we have a vacant lot on the eastern side of Shadow Lake, which is in a shoreline residential neighborhood. All the other properties along this stretch of Sunset View Road on the lakeside are developed. This is one of the few rural backlots in the area, and this one is currently vacant. The front portion, as we can see in this aerial photograph, is maintained as lawn, and the back area has various vegetation in there, a lot of trees for sure. So as I've identified already, the LSR zone does permit development as a right. The rural general zone in the back does allow for a lot of development too. It's just the nature of the access that's different in this case. The rural general zone, for instance, does permit agricultural uses, whether or not there are buildings on the parcel. However, non-LSR zone parcels that do not abut an approved street are not allowed to construct buildings as of right. So as the back portion of this parcel is much larger than the front portion and it's more secluded. That is why the applicant is seeking relief in this case in order to move the building envelope off of the LSR zone portion of the parcel into the larger portion in the back that is in the RG zone. And as we can see in this image here, the dwelling is proposed kind of in the southern area, central southern area of the eastern portion of the parcel. A detached garage and a shed are also proposed to the north and northeast of the dwelling. And we have an example of the dwelling that is proposed in this case for this parcel. And then we get into some of the property views here. So this is Sunset View Road right here. And then we have the grassed area of the subject parcel, which is the LSR zone. The LSR zone does go into the forest a little bit as well. Excuse me. So this is me at the northwestern corner of the parcel looking southeast across. And then I've gone down to about where the car is on the road. So I've gone south along Sunset View Road and taken a picture looking back kind of northeast across that grassed parcel as well that's in the LSR. And then the forest and the RG zone is kind of tucked away to the right there. And then this is just other views of the grassed LSR zone again, keeping in mind that there is some of the LSR that is also forested, such as in this photograph to the left. Sunset View Road is running pretty much continuously along here in both of those photographs. And then we have the back portion of the parcel. There is a trail that leads into the back portion. So I just walked in a little bit to take a snapshot for committee so they can see what that back section looks like. So staff are of the opinion that this proposal does meet the 4 tests for minor variance. The principle of development has been established on the property through the LSR and the RG zones that are in place on this parcel. What limits development on the RG zoned portion of the lot right now is the nature of the access. The property does not abut a municipally improved road, but access is gained via private road, which is Sunset View Road. The dwelling will comply with all the setbacks and other zone requirements of the RG zone. The property is situated away from the shoreline and is not included in any of the natural heritage feature mapping of our City of Kawartha Lakes official plan. The property is designated rural within our official plan as well, and a variety of land uses, such as agricultural uses and residential uses, are permitted within the rural designation. Since the writing of this report, comments have been received from 5 property owners. So we have David Castles of 45 Sunset View Road. I will back up to the aerial photograph so committee can orient themselves here. So 45 Sunset View Road down here. We have Debbie Renakama, I believe I pronounced that correctly, I'm sorry if I have not, of 42 Sunset View Road, which is to the immediate west. Richard Radu and Sandra Santamersky of 10 Sunset View Road, which is just in the upper portion of this aerial photograph. Dimitri Bandura of 36 Sunset View Road, also to the west. And Julio Enrique of 40 Sunset View Road. And all of these comments should be in committee's amended agenda package. So the issues raised can effectively be grouped into the following categories: tree clearing and other impacts to the environmental build of the property, as point number 1. Point number 2, whether any studies are necessary to build on the property. Point number 3, the uses permitted within the rural general zone category. And point number 4, driveway placement. So staff at this time do wish to reiterate that the principle of development has already been established through the current zoning in place on this parcel. It is only the nature of the access to the back portion, which is zoned rural general, being a private road, which is different. In response to the issues raised, staff offers the following. In response to point 1, The tree does not have a tree cutting bylaw. Sorry, the city does not have a tree cutting bylaw. My apologies. In response to point 2, no environmental study is required on the land which is already zoned for development. This land is also outside of the regulated area of the Kawartha Region Conservation Authority, and no features of environmental significance have been recorded within our official plan's natural heritage features schedule. In response to point number 3, the rural general zone is not an environmental protection zone. It is the former township of Somerville's version of what many of our other township bylaws have as their agricultural zone. So agricultural uses are one of the many uses which are permitted as a right within the RG zone, whether or not a building is present. In response to item number 4, driveway placement is not part of this application. It is staff's understanding that a driveway entrance off of a private road does not require municipal approval. Staff does respectfully recommend that the application be granted, subject to the conditions identified in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harding, and I would suggest that you listen carefully when we get to the public comment, because I have a feeling you're going to be responding to a number of those. Committee, are there any questions to the planner? Mr. Marsh.
Would it not, why wouldn't we just do a rezoning on this? You could do a rezoning instead. Is that, okay, that's my question. Could we do a rezoning on this property instead of the variance?
Through Mr. Chair, that is always an option. In this case, because the LSR zone is already on a portion of this parcel, we felt that the minor variance process was the appropriate first avenue for this proposal to be examined. If the entire portion, or sorry, if the entire parcel was already zoned RG, then I think that would be an entirely different conversation.
But they're not building on that. They're building on the rural general. Should that not trigger a rezoning? And then that would address all the concerns that these people have. They'd have to go through some, they'd have to get approvals to rezone it regarding waterways and environmentally sensitive and all the concerns. Would that not be addressed in a rezoning?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in this case, the zoning is in place for development, right? It's just the access that is different. So I'd say even in the case where if the entire parcel was zoned RG, the discussion will still be had whether or not variance is the more appropriate avenue rather than rezoning. While I'm not the pre-consultation committee and I don't represent myself as being one, I do still want to reiterate that there are no other natural heritage features in our schedule. So I don't know how those concerns that have been brought forward would have been addressed through rezoning, given the zoning that's in place and the policy information that we have to date.
That's good. You answered my questions. Thank you.
All right, further questions from the committee? All right, being none, is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application?
No, Mr. Speaker, that's fine. Doug Carroll is representing me, and he's going to speak on my behalf.
Mr. Carroll, I'm not sure what went on before you, but go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon again. We've reviewed David's report and we have no issue or concern with the recommendation or the proposed condition. It is appropriate, reasonable. I would like to confirm that I agree with David's review of the official plan Schedule A7 and B7. His assessment is accurate. I would note that the Conservation Authority has not raised any issues with respect to this because it is, number one, outside of its jurisdiction, but number two, it's also part of their relationship with the city to report on matters that are of environmentally significant to them, and they have not done so. The issue for development on the larger east portion of the property is, as David has said, the type of access is not a public road, it is a private road. that triggers the requirement for a variance to that section of the bylaw to allow a building permit to ultimately be issued, but only if the variance is approved and authorized by the committee. David is correct in his review of the relevant zone provisions in the limited service residential zone and the rural general zone. A residential use is already permitted on part 4 and on part 2. So the residential use has been permitted on this property since 1984, if not possibly before that. The proposed dwelling and accessory buildings are similar to those that exist on developed properties in this residential neighborhood. As David has indicated to you, this is one of 3 existing backlots in this neighborhood that are served by Sunset View Road, which has its access from Shadow Lake Road 4 onto Baseline Road. Baseline Road is municipally maintained. The other 2 roads are privately maintained and privately managed by the community that pays an annual fee to their group for the required maintenance of Shadow Lake Road 4 and Sunset View Road. I agree with David's analysis of the 4 points that he has summarized the concerns into. We are available, I'm available to answer any questions that the committee has with regards to this application. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I did see another person online there. I don't know if that was the applicant. Did the applicant wish to speak to it as well? All right, I'm going to assume no. Are there any questions of, oh, there he is. And what is your name, sir? Can't hear you.
There, sorry.
What is your name?
Daryl Marsh.
Jeez, they want
My
to
name
just...
is Daryl Marsh.
All right, go ahead.
Yes, no, I'm, everything's fine. It's just all the comments that come from Doug Carroll, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
And again, are there any questions of the planner or the applicant? All right, being none, is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of this application? And, geez, we're flipping and flopping around. All right, anyone wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to the application?
Indeed. My name is Debbie Renkema. I want to speak in opposition to this application.
They just want to smoke along. Excuse me, would you give us your name, please?
I did so. I said this is Debbie Renkema, and I would like to speak in opposition of this application.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you very much. But first and foremost, I do have 2 questions. There's a Mr. Marsh that's on the committee. First of all, hello, committee, chair, Mr. Carroll, Mr. Marsh, and Mr. Harding. So first and foremost, I'd like to understand, because there's a committee member with the surname Marsh, and I just want to ensure that there's no conflict of interest, please.
Mr. Chairman, I've been around for a long time, and I certainly know the conflict of interest rules and regulations, and I actually take exception to being questioned.
Certainly, ma'am, is a personal call of Mr. Marsh, and he's chosen to not, so we shall proceed.
May I just respond to that? This is a factual question based on a surname. I don't really know how long, nor does that have any relevance on the response. So it should be a very easy question and no offense should be taken.
Well, let me explain the
yeah.
process. If I was related, I would state that at the beginning of the meeting when they asked for conflict of interest. Okay, I have never met this man, he's not related, and I possibly is. I've found people that don't even have the same last name as me that I'm related to and didn't know. So, no, like I said, I would certainly declare it. I don't know this man.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for that. That was something that was brought through by one of my neighbors, and I felt the need to address that. So I'm very grateful for your response.
All right, carry on, ma'am.
Finally advised me of Mr. Carroll's role, other than representation. I'm not too sure I understand his role relative to supporting this variance request.
Mr. Carroll is a professional planner and is hired by clients to represent them as it relates to applications.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful for that. So nevertheless, I'm going to proceed, and I'm very grateful for the time today. One of the main things is maintaining the integrity of our properties. We as neighbors, and ourselves in particular, are concerned about that in surrounding areas while meeting Mr. Marsh's needs. And in doing so, we want to make sure that we abide by all laws, bylaws, and maintain the natural heritage. When we refer to the natural heritage, I am referring to our general climate change heritage within our country. I do not believe that something has to be designated as natural heritage to be preserved, in which case, or that a bylaw has to exist to prevent people from cutting down trees. Because if that was the case, we would have no trees, we would have no ecosystem, or whatever. So I just want to make sure the natural heritage is in the context of our lands in Canada. So as I move forward, I want to continue. Again, you know, it's one thing moving forward, but not at the expense of existing neighbors. And regarding my submission, I understand that there are many aspects that will be considered downstream in the construction approval process. However, this is well down the road. It closes the gate after the horse is long gone. I also understand that the traditional manner of addressing many of these, particularly usage, is retrospectively. Again, that's after it happens. The damage is already done. It's well beyond the time. So it's critical that proactive actions and preventive measures are taken to prevent our nature, our watershed, etc., from being disrupted. This is a fundamental concept relative to climate change. Zoning is one of those aspects of things. The variance requested is not about approving road access to LSR RG property. It is indeed a means of rezoning that property in usage. This is not about the road, it's about the designation. So it's about zoning the property in practice, which is simply not acceptable. This is the only time during the construction process that neighbors and public will be solicited for their insights. We want to ensure our voices are heard, that our constitutional rights are respected. First, I want to address some concerns and misconceptions in Mr. David Harding's report, which recommend the variance be granted. Some of the statements could be considered quite erroneous, I might add. So background, at no place during the notification of the variance was there any forthcoming of the fact that the lot 4 and 5 were deemed LSR. As a matter of fact, I talked to Mr. Harding different times, and I also spoke with Mr. LaHaye, and that information was not on the application. Nevertheless, that's good information, and I appreciate the report that was provided. This area, the LSR area, constitutes approximately 5% of the total property in question. Approximately 5%. There's a good 95% that is in the RG zoning area. Agricultural, with specific uses affiliated with it. The applicant is seeking to construct a single detached dwelling. Dwelling means a house, apartment, or a place of residence. Place of residence denotes a main place of residence through definition. RG allows for a dwelling only, not vacation usage. And from all intents and purposes, in discussion with Mr. Marsh, his intention is to put in a vacation usage property. Dwelling. Not even a dwelling, vacation usage, a cottage, he refers to it as. Okay, his home is elsewhere, his business is elsewhere. LRS zoning supports dwellings and vacation homes. So it denotes there's a difference between a dwelling and a vacation home. You, as in within your bylaws, denote a difference. So again, it's not just access, it's usage. As you've seen from the diagrams, the back portion are all trees. There is a path in one corner of the property, as has been outlined. So the zone, a general statement indicating the LSR and RG does not give adequate context. Again, I'm talking about the 5% versus the 95%. Adjacent uses. In the report, there's a suggestion that the north and south shoreline, residential, and forest. As you saw from the picture and the diagram, and I can call up the number, or perhaps Mr. Harding can put it up again, they're a tree. There's no shoreline residential immediately adjacent to on the north and south side. There is abundance of trees and forested areas of natural heritage throughout there. There's actually even a beaver dam in that area, which is not on Mr. March's property. Okay. So that information is somewhat misleading because everything is shoreline, but there's nothing abutting the property in question. They're hundreds of feet away. On the west shoreline, there is residential. That's us. And there are many meters of naturally treed areas between us and the property in question. So I think while the area might be denoted residential, LSR, the fact is that there's forested area between. The rationale, minor in nature, I would venture to say, you stated yes, I would venture to say no. The result of the variance report is changing 95% of that property and opening up the door for future zoning misusages. This is not a minor consideration at all. Is the proposal desirable and appropriate for use of the land? Many people are saying no for that reason. The property is situated on the shoreline residential neighborhood. The use of the term neighborhood is perplexing to me. This is a rural area with nature abounding throughout. This is why we are there. This is why we have properties there. It is not a neighborhood. If you call it a neighborhood, that infers the whole surrounding perimeter of the lake. If the terminology is accepted, the entire Shadow Lake is permitted as a neighborhood. And neighborhoods are generally referred to in larger cities, towns, and suburbia. This is a rural area. The property is the last undeveloped lot along the portion of Sunset. In theory, but not reality. If you again look at those diagrams, it's not only the lot, it's the only lot with a dwelling, or would be the only lot with a dwelling on the east side of Sunset View Road. The only one. Okay. Agricultural natural heritage again. As a result of the lots within the neighborhood are improved with dwellings, I know maybe that's the terminology used in your industry, but I don't necessarily consider them improved. The proposed building form is in keeping with the uses established on the other lots. You're talking a different ballgame. You're talking an RG zone across the road with a forested area surrounding.
Ms. Rankema, I will afford you 2 more minutes, please. So if you're getting close to summation.
8 minutes. Okay, thank you very much. I'll continue on. So anyways, LG and RG. Due to the above analysis, the variance in minor in nature and desirable and appropriate for land use? No. Breaking up natural, et cetera, et cetera. Do the variance maintain the intent of the proposed zoning? You say yes, we say no. The western portion of the property is sufficiently sized to accommodate. Yes, but that's the RG zone. So I go back to, and Mr. Marsh, committee member, thank you very much for bringing this forward. Why is not the application simply for rezoning? General provisions also lay out exceptions to the rules by allowing lots of the RZ zone developed. But it's not, it's an RG zone. So I'm going through these points step by step. I'm going to expedite the points. As a matter of fact, there's difficulty in maintaining frontage. This individual cannot even build something on the LSR portion of that property because there's insufficient space. So these things were known when the property was acquired. I'm not going to talk about the plan, the official plan at this point in time. I'm going to try and summarize very quickly. Engineering, there's no grade plans here. There's no transparency. The proposed driveway follows a path that is so close to our property, and there's going to be grading on that driveway that's going to impact our property. There's 57 feet almost for the driveway to go through, yet the plan says, you're saying that's not part of it, but you're approving it, and then we have to deal with it at a later date. So hydro, that's been not transparent. This could be hydro, there could be hydro wires extending across the road, cutting trees down, giving right of way, etc. These are all considerations. The usage, it's not transparent, it's not residential. There's a 2-story, 1.4-story proposed with large windows projecting light.
All right, Ms. Rankema, I'm going to ask for a summation.
Recreational area, and let me just finish this, please. Recreational area, they plan to put a an ATV track, etc. So these are all on RG. By approving this, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Thank you very much. But having said that, this is Mr. Marsh's dream. Well, all the other residents have a dream and are fulfilling the dream, and their needs and things should be respected similarly.
All right, thank you for
I
that.
will close there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harding, do you wish to respond to any of the comments that were made? Can't hear you, Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just got myself. Through you, Mr. Chair, there's really not too much else I can say. I feel that the points were summarized both in the 4 points that I identified up front and my responses to those points. The only thing I can say again is that driveway placement is not part of this. If Mr. Marsh wanted to install a driveway into the parcel tomorrow without a building, he could do so. So that's why I'm saying the driveway construction is independent of committee's approval. As I said before, there is no tree protection bylaw. There is no zoning in place that would prevent the clearing of the trees. This property has the LSR zone in the front and the RG in the back. If Mr. Marsh wished to clear cut and bulldoze the entire back portion of this parcel tomorrow and do a Christmas tree farm, he could do so without a building. So I just want to convey that to committee as well when they have their deliberations. And if committee has any additional questions for me, I will definitely be available to answer them.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're directing your question to Mr. Harding?
For clarification, and I believe I asked you earlier, and the reason I asked, and you...
Catching you totally there, Dave.
Sorry. I just want to verify that the RG, and that's why I asked, and you clarified very well, and I believe my mind's straight, but I want to make sure. If the whole property was zoned RG, they could get a building permit. It would be, we're only here for the variance. The RG allows for a dwelling, correct?
Mr. Harding? Mr. Harding, are you with us?
Mr. Chair. Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the RG zone does permit a dwelling.
And the LSR allows for a dwelling. Is that
Yes.
correct? Right. So if the whole thing was zoned one way or another, other than the LSR, I mean, it allows for the seasonal road. That's really the only difference, correct? That you can build on there. There's no restrictions. There's nothing about the RG zoning. And that's, as I said, I asked the question because I perhaps saw it, but you clarified it wouldn't matter. There's no impact as far as a dwelling. And whether a dwelling is seasonal or year-round does not have anything to do with this, nor anything else for that matter. Is that correct? The zoning.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that is correct. Both sides permit a dwelling.
Right.
Whether this, so the dwelling would be constructed as a dwelling, whether this future occupant wishes to use it seasonally or year-round is their choice. But there is nothing that is going to prevent that dwelling from being used seasonally.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Further questions of the applicant or the planner or applicant? All right. Ms. Renkema, thank you very much for taking the time. We appreciate it. Your comments are duly, no, I'm not getting in any debate with you. So your comments are duly noted and will become part of the official package.
Sir, I have to correct that because your bylaws state that LSR allow vacation and dwelling, but RG only allows dwelling. So clearly there is a differentiation because your bylaws state a difference. So I think it would behoove the parties at present to understand that and to learn the difference and to educate all of us on the difference of that.
All right.
Because
Thank you.
your
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Your comments are duly noted and are part of the official package here. So I would suggest if you have further questions, please contact our planners. And thank you again for taking the time. Is there anyone else online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? In opposition to the application? In opposition to the application? Okay. All right. Committee, where are we? Counselor,
As printed.
do I have a seconder? Mr. Marsh. Further comments or questions with respect to it? Mrs. Archer.
Just like some clarification, please, from the comments that the or Ren, whatever her name was, sorry. She is very concerned about this seasonal residential as opposed to permanent. Could Mr. Harding please set me straight on what she's talking about? Does he have the answers?
Mr. Harding, do you have that answer?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. But first, a distinction. So yes, she is correct that there is a separate permitted use term within the Somerville zoning bylaw, which is for seasonal residential use. I do want to say that the LSR zone does not just preclude year-round use, though. The LSR zone permits year-round or seasonal residential, whereas the RG zone permits just year-round residential. So the distinction there, so it's not applicable to this parcel, but just so that committee has the background, if there was a zone category that permitted only seasonal residential, then the lot could not be used more intensely than the seasonal residential use. But if the lot permits year-round residential, then you can decrease the intensity of that residential use because a more intensive residential use, i.e. year-round, is permitted. So hopefully that clarifies things for committee, but I can further elaborate if needed.
I believe you have done your job. Thank you very much for that. Is there anything further on the motion? Yes, Mr. Richard.
Question to the planner through you. Do we need something in this recommendation addressing the road issue, in that if the equipment coming in damages the road, the applicant will be responsible for bringing it up to its current standard?
I think we've been through that before, and it would be a civil matter, but I'll let Mr. Harding go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. That is correct. This is a private road, so it would be a civil matter. There is nothing that the city could do in terms of imposing a condition to resolve challenges between private landowners.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor. Anything further from committee members on that motion? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. And let's take 5 minutes. All right, I'll call the meeting back to order, and we're now dealing with file number D20-2021-059, and this is 93 Paradise Road, Geographic Township of Eldon, Ward 1. Go ahead, Mr. Stainton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The purpose and effect of this application is to request for relief from section 13.2.1.3 subsection B of the Township of Eldon zoning bylaw to reduce the minimum interior side yard setbacks from 3 meters on one side and 2.2 meters on the other side to 2.51 meters and 1.27 meters respectively on the other side. The relief is required to facilitate the construction of a second-story addition to a vacation dwelling. It is important to note that the map that is shown on the screen should also include the backlot portion of the south side of Paradise Road, which will be shown on the next slide. So as you can see here, the property also includes the backlot portion to the east. The subject property is situated in a shoreline residential neighborhood on the south side of Canal Lake. This reach of Canal Lake is developed with several shoreline residential lots comprised primarily of smaller vacation dwellings. It is anticipated that some degree of infill will occur along this stretch of Canal Lake in the near future. Here is the proposed site plan of the project, showing the proposed location of the addition in relation to the rest of the property. It's important to note that no further encroachment into the interior side yards is proposed through the application. So shown here on the left is the existing side elevations with the northern elevation on the top. And the southern elevation on the bottom. Excuse me. On the right, the proposed east and west elevations are shown here and here. So you have your front yard, and then you have your rear yard. With the proposed side elevations, with the northern elevation on top and the southern elevation on the bottom, shown here, you'll notice there is a covered balcony proposed that is compliant with the applicable development standards above a portion of the existing wooden deck that is to be replaced. The shoreline lot contains a U-shaped bungalow as shown from Paradise Road on the left-hand side, and is surrounded by vegetative buffers along the interior side yards, which assist in screening the property from the road and the abutting parcels. A large wooden deck on the water side of the dwelling projects towards the lake and contains a hot tub. The waterside deck is proposed to be replaced as mentioned. The back lot is also well vegetated with forests surrounding the back lot, which contains a detached garage and provides additional parking spaces for the subject property. The back lot and garage are shown on the right. Provided here are some examples of the built form that exists within the neighborhood. While the majority of the vacation homes in the area are smaller single-story cottages, like the neighboring parcel at 95 Paradise Road shown on the left. There are examples of two-story seasonal dwellings, such as 77 Paradise, as well as the residence shown on the right. Unfortunately, I didn't note the exact civic address, and I couldn't make out from the aerial photography exactly which address this property is, and there is no street view mapping along Paradise Road, but I assure you it was in the vicinity in the neighborhood. As shown on the right, there is a mature cedar hedge that runs the entire length of the eastern property boundary with mature trees and shrub species running along the western lot line, shown on the left. The presence of the vegetation aids in maintaining privacy screening along the lots, notwithstanding an additional story proposed through the application. So again, this is along the northern lot line, you can see it's quite a substantive established cedar hedge. The proposed 0.49 meter and 0.93 meter reductions from the requirements of the zoning bylaw are negligible and minor in nature. The projections into the side yard essentially emulate the existing footprint of the dwelling. There are no windows proposed on the interior side yards of the additional story as to negate any privacy implications to the abutting property owners. You can see the southern abutting property on the left is also absent any windows shown here, with the photo on the right showing the existing southern face of the vacation dwelling that will be duplicated with the proposed second story. So as the detached garage, which is shown on both slides on the abutting property to the north, is the closest building, no massing impacts are anticipated as a result of the application. No additional access points are proposed along the interior side yards of the dwelling, and sufficient space also remains within the side yards to allow passage between the front and rear yards of the subject lands. Development engineering has confirmed there will be no drainage impacts to the adjacent properties through the proposal. Comments were also received from the supervisor of Part 8 sewage systems of the Building and Septic Division with no concerns. A Section 59 notice, as the property is located within a wellhead protection area of the Western Trent Municipal System, was also issued by the risk management official to permit the proposed construction. Since the writing of the report, comments have also been received from the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority dated October 14th, 2021, stating that the proposal is generally consistent and in conformity with the natural heritage policies of the applicable provincial and local plans. On this basis, LSRCA, or the Lake Simcoe and Region Conservation Authority, recommends approval of the application. Since the writing of the report, public comments questioning the nature of the application were provided by Gary Hanna, who's the co-trustee of the estate of Gwen Hanna, who's the registered owner of 95 Paradise Road. And those comments were received yesterday, October 20th, 2021. Just before I got on the online for the meeting today at 12:28 p.m., I had an opportunity to speak with Jennifer Hanna, who is Gary's wife, who was satisfied with the clarification that I provided her on what exactly is being proposed. And she said that there were no longer any questions or concerns related to the application. Based on the contents of the report and in consideration of the comments provided as part of the review, staff acknowledges the application meets all 4 tests of a minor variance, and staff respectfully recommends approval of the application subject to the conditions identified within the report. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions of the planner? Being none, is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, my name is Yaso Somalingam. I'm the applicant on this project. Mr. Stainton, he explained very well exactly what's happening. I had a chat with the homeowner last night too. They met the adjoining neighbor, but they were under the impression they already got the notice and then everything fine. But it's looked like the adjoining neighbor got the notice late. But they tried to reach him this morning too, and they couldn't reach each other. But just to inform you, the adjoining neighbor's garage is only about 6 or 8 inches away from the property line, while my client has over 1.2 meters of the existing scenario where he's building on top of it. And visually, there's no effect with my client's second story addition to the neighbor's property at all. And we are basically going with on top of the existing footprint or existing ground floor structure. And the existing ground floor structure meets the zoning requirements, and we are simply going on top of that existing structure.
All right, thank you, sir. We thank you for the comments. Are there any questions of the applicant? All right, thank you for that. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application, in support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application, opposition to the application? Being none, committee, where are we? Mr. Strangway?
As printed.
Do I have a seconder? Mrs. Richardson? Any comments or questions on the motion? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you, sir. Your motion's approved, or your application's approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
All right, moving right along. We're now dealing with file number D20-2021-060. And this is 92 Elkhorn Drive, former town of Lindsay, Ward 5. Mr. Harding, go ahead. Have we lost Mr. Harding?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nope, I'm dealing with a new computer. Whoa.
That looked like something out of Star Wars.
I'm getting all Star Warsy on you.
Go.
I'm sitting in a new workstation, so things aren't going quite according to plan. My cursor disappears on me sometimes.
Call technology.
Oh, it's beautiful. Okay. So here, I think I'm sharing now. All right, so we are back on Elkhorn Drive again, Mr. Chair. We're going in sequence almost down the road here. So this application is to permit a deck with stairs within the rear yard. So relief is sought from the rear yard setback in order to permit the construction of this deck. So the subject property is within a developing neighborhood within Lindsay's North Ward. To the west and south is new development, and to the east is a mixture of vacant land and new homes that are under construction. Jennings Creek and its ravine lands are to the north, which we can see better in this photograph. So the update here is that all the houses to the west, since this photograph have been taken, are all constructed now. And we still have a lot of undeveloped land on the eastern side, which committee will see shortly in the slides. And then the Jennings Creek forested area and stormwater management pond on that north side there. So here we have the sketch showing the proposal. So as we can see here, the deck is proposed in the northwestern portion of the rear yard. And then the steps are coming down and kind of wrapping around in that L-shaped pattern. And then the applicant was kind enough to provide an elevation, so committee can see what that would look like from the Jennings Creek ravine side. And now we have some pictures for committee's review here. So staff are of the opinion that the approval meets the 4 tests for minor variance. So there is a grade change between Elkhorn Drive and Jennings Creek ravine, which allows for the dwellings along the northern stretch of Elkhorn Drive to have walkout basements or basements with very large windows on their north walls. So we have an example of that in this case here. The subject property is the building with the red brick. So we can see that that property does not have a walkout basement, but it definitely has very high, very large basement windows, and we've got a sliding door installed for a future deck. And then the property next door, however, does have a walkout basement design. I anticipate that committee will see an application for that gray brick building in the near future. So as I identified previously, the deck will occupy a portion of the rear yard, being the western portion. The central and eastern portions of the rear yard will remain for landscaped open amenity space. So here's another shot. So we've got the eastern rear yard here. So the deck's going to be on the far side. The lot line's about where that sliver of light is between the shadow. I know it might be a bit more difficult for committee to see that. So the deck's kind of occupying this area, casted in shadow. And then we just have another shot of the rear yard from me standing in the ravine area, stormwater management area, looking out across the entire backyard of this parcel. And then this is another picture. So this time I'm kind of standing within the yard where the deck is going to be constructed. So this being the western portion of the rear yard. And I'm kind of looking out towards the east, so you can see that there are some houses that have been built there, others that are under construction, and then a lot over on this side where this camper is parked that have not been constructed yet along Spear Street, I believe is what it's going to be called. So as the lot abuts the ravine, as can be seen in both of these pictures, there is no abutting residential use to the north, which may cause a land use conflict with this parcel if the deck were to come closer to that rear lot line. Also, the deck is maintaining the same setback to the western side lot line as the house is, so there's no impacts that are associated with respect to use between this parcel and the dwelling next door. And also by respecting that setback, there is adequate space for movement between the front and rear yards, also to maintain the rear yard space between where the deck and stairs is going to be and that eventual fence on that mutual western lot line. Excuse me. And that's also going to maintain lot grading and drainage. So the property is designated residential within the city of Kawartha Lakes. We are in the town of Lindsay official plan because the Lindsay secondary plan is still under appeal. So it is designated residential within the town of Lindsay official plan, and low density residential uses in the form of single detached dwellings, including the built form on this subject parcel, and those accessory uses are anticipated within that designation. So staff does respectfully recommend that the application be granted, subject to the conditions identified in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Are there any questions of the planner? Mr. Strangway?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Harding, I found your comments at the very beginning interesting. We're just working our way down the road. I've asked about this before. It appears that all these houses are going to have to apply for a permit to put these decks out. Has there been any discussion with staff at the city in order to address this, to avoid each one of these coming to committee of adjustment? I'm just wondering if there's something that could be looked at, should be looked at, because right now it just appears we're working our way down the road.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of anything other than the developer filing a zoning bylaw amendment, as has been done in other areas of this subdivision. But I will defer to the manager of planning for further explanation.
All right. Anything further from the committee? All right. Oh. All right. Go ahead, Ms.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Member Strangway, to your question, it's certainly consideration of a larger scale or a broader zoning amendment approach initiated by planning staff is an option. It's an option that we consider in any number of areas, in fact, and actually on properties that this committee has seen in recent months. Based on the number of lots that might be entertained in an amendment of this nature and the resources required to focus on the scale of that amendment, it would at this point be in the owner's best interest to pursue variances, as has been the case. Frankly, they would move through the process quite a bit more efficiently than looking at a broader scale project, let's say, initiated by staff at this point. The resources have been placed in other areas.
Thank you, Ms. Berry. I finally got Mr. Strangway on my peripheral, and I'm working on yourself now. So just a matter of time here, just a matter of time. All right. Is there anything further of the planner? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application?
No, I think David's report summed it up pretty well.
What's your name, sir?
Steve Curtis from MVW.
All right. Are there any questions of the applicant? Being none, is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of this application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to the application? Being none, committee, where are we? Ms. Archer, Ms. Richardson, as printed. All right, any further comments or questions on the motion on the floor? All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. All right. All right, we're now dealing with D20-2021-061, and this is 233 Long Beach Road, Geographic Township of Femlin, Ward 3. Mr. Stainton, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The purpose and effect of the application is to request relief from section 3.1.2.1 to permit the construction of a 140 square meter, or approximately a 1,500 square foot detached garage, which is not part of the main building, within the front yard of the subject property. The subject property is located in a predominantly rural area where agricultural use surrounds the parcel. The Southview Estates community on the western shore of Sturgeon Lake can be found to the southeast and south of Long Beach Road. The property is located on the inside of a large bend where Long Beach Road changes direction in order to avoid Sturgeon Lake. There are several residences along Long Beach Road with no other dwellings in the immediate vicinity of the property on the north side of Long Beach Road. Shown here is a site plan of the property featuring the location of the garage right here. The location of the septic bed to the northeast of the dwelling, and I would also like to point out that to the west of the dwelling, there is an underground cistern that is associated with the well that is located at that location, which essentially prevents the garage from being located right beside or attached to the dwelling itself. At this time, I would like to make the committee aware of the garden shed, which is shown in the northwest corner here, to the northwest of the dwelling. It's important to note that the report provided did not include a condition regarding the relocation of the garden shed, as is typically recommended in similar cases, within the property in order to comply with the applicable setbacks of the zone. I would like to recommend to committee that such condition be included in order to address any non-compliance issues presented by the location of the garden shed. And near the end of the presentation, I will happily craft any said condition for you. Shown here are conceptual elevations for the garage with the location of the 3 windows as shown here. These are actually going to be garage doors. This is very conceptual in nature, as the applicant didn't want to spend an exorbitant amount of money in order to have something that potentially was not approved. There will be a window facing on the southern elevation facing Long Beach Road, which assists in breaking up that exterior wall that faces the road. The dwelling itself, shown on the left, was constructed in 2013, according to MPAC, and has a larger walkout deck with a swimming pool. The front view of the dwelling is shown on the left again, with the photo taken facing west of the front of the dwelling shown on the right. There is a fill pile shown here, which will be removed during the garage construction. And again, the cistern is actually located just here and further to the north. Oh, there we go. No, there we go. Sorry about that. The agricultural zone permits a variety of rural uses, including single detached dwelling. As the lot was created by consent, but the size of the lot is greater than 2 hectares, the lot essentially functions as an undersized agricultural lot in accordance with the zoning bylaw. Now, while the lot exceeds the minimum lot frontage requirement of 230 meters for the A1 zone at 292 meters, the lot is deficient in terms of area at only 2.43 hectares, whereas the A1 zone requires 38 hectares. As the lot was created well before the passing of the zoning bylaw, section 3.1 section 3.11.1, which is the provision that relates to lot area and frontage less than required of the zoning bylaw applies. Excuse me. The dwelling is compliant with the setback, yard, lot coverage, parking, and landscaping requirements of the agricultural zone. It's important to note that the garage is also compliant, or would be compliant, I should say, with the height requirement for buildings accessory to residential uses as well. As the garage is not proposed directly in front of the dwelling will continue to appear as the principal use when viewed from the road. So shown here is the front yard of the subject lands facing southwest towards the entrance here on the left. And on the right, the photo is taken facing the southeast. These photos basically give an appreciation for the amount of area that we're dealing with within the front yard of this property. On the property, aside from the aforementioned garden shed, there is some storage space located under sections of the deck. The proposed garage will provide enclosed storage for items that would otherwise be stored outside and vulnerable to the elements. So shown on the left is the storage that's offered currently by the deck facing to the east, with the photo on the right showing the rear of the dwelling, as well as you can see portions of the swimming pool here. The property contains a well-established hedgerow within close proximity to the western and northern property boundaries, which is shown here facing the south on both sides. The vegetation effectively screens the presence of the dwelling and would screen the presence of the garage when traveling eastbound along Long Beach Road. And the presence of the trees would essentially detract, I should say, from any aesthetic dominance the detached garage would impose through being constructed just to the southwest of the existing dwelling. So again, you can see there's portions of the cistern here, the fill pile that was mentioned. The garage location would be in this area here and just ahead of that fill pile. The intent of section 3.1.2.1 of the zoning bylaw is to restrict the placement of accessory buildings within a front yard, relegating them to the side yards or rear yards. Side and rear yards are less visually prominent locations in comparison to a front yard. As it is usually the most visible yard from the street, front yards have the greatest ability to influence and shape the nature of the character of the neighborhood and the appearance and use. The proposed location of the detached garage is approximately 55 meters from the front lot line, with the dwelling located approximately 70 meters from the front lot line. Given the distance from the front of the lot, any building prominence imposed as a result of the garage location will be diminished. The right-hand slide, I should say, provides an approximate overview for the location of the garage in relation to the dwelling. With the garden shed, you can see actually in both slides tucked in here. Again, condition is recommended in order to ensure the shed is relocated on the property to comply with the applicable property standards of the zone. Comments were received from Engineering and Corporate Assets Division and the Building and Septic Division's Part 8 Sewage System Supervisors, stating that they have no objections to the proposal. Based on the contents of the report, staff acknowledges the application meets all 4 tests of a minor variance, and staff respectfully recommends approval of the application subject to the conditions identified in the report and to be crafted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stainton. Are there any questions of the planner? Mr. Strangway, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is the size of this garden shed that you're suggesting should be moved?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is less than 100 square feet, which does not require a building permit. However, it is still considered a structure. in accordance with the zoning bylaw and does need to comply with the interior side yard setbacks, in this case of the agricultural zone, which would be a 9-meter setback.
So how far does this shed have to be moved? Are we talking about a very minor distance?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and to Member Strangway, it has to be moved or relocated on the property at least 9 meters from both of the property lines, the one that's running to the north as well as the rear one. And the applicant has agreed to do such.
Thank you.
Anything further of the planner? Mrs. Archer?
I understand what you've just said, but is it within our power to ignore it and leave it there? Because it looks quite nice tucked in there where it's not sticking out in the middle.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would not be doing my job by overseeing such a basically such a matter unless the relief was actually sought through the application and advertised and circulated as such.
Anything further on the planner? All right. Is the applicant online? Does the applicant wish to speak to the application? And your name, sir?
Chairman, my name is John Mason.
Go ahead, sir.
I have no other additional comments other than the shed needs to be moved roughly a half a meter, which is not a big issue to me at all. We'll correct the location of the shed promptly and proceed.
All right, thank you for that. Are there any questions of the applicant? All right, thank you, sir. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of this application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? Committee. Councillor Yeo, Mr. Marsh.
As printed.
As printed. Any further comments or questions?
Oh.
Yeah, no, that's right. As you were going to. Go ahead, Mr. Staten. Sorry
Yes.
about that.
That's okay. Through you, Mr. Chair, I did craft an alternate resolution which did include the condition. However, just for the purposes of formality, I will provide the recommended condition.
Thank you.
So the additional condition reads as follows: that within 24 months after the date of the notice of decision, the owners shall submit to the Secretary Treasurer photographic evidence confirming that the building identified on Appendix C to Report C of A 2021-061 as a garden shed has been relocated to comply with the applicable development standards of the zone.
And Councillor Yeo and Mr. Marsh, are you comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Yep. Right. Committee, any questions or comments with respect to that? All right, that was my error, Mr. Stainton. I apologize to you, and because you did mention it, so thank you for that. All right. I guess, is everyone in favor? Thank you, that carries. Moving right along, we're dealing with D20, file number D20-2021-062. And this is location Lot 3, Elm Street, Farmer Village of Amimi, Ward 6, and we're dealing with Mr. Harding. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to basically cover both lots at the same time, even though they will be dealt with separately by committee. So just to differentiate, so we have Lot 3, which is on the western side, and then Lot 4, which is on the eastern side. This application is specific to Lot 3. So the
All
purpose
right.
of
Now,
this application,
Mr. Harding, we're going to have to, these are two different files, so, all right. So you're going to deal with them on as one application then? Is that what I'm hearing?
no, Mr. Chair, thank you for allowing me to explain. What I meant, Mr. Chair, was that my presentation for both would be very similar. So I'm going to put a lot of emphasis on the first presentation.
Right, it's a similar that threw me, so go ahead. Gotcha.
Yes, that's what I meant, is that my second presentation will be quite brief when it comes to it because the analysis is pretty much identical.
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, so lot 3 is where the subject land pointer is pointing in this case. So this application proposes to permit development in the form of the construction of a single detached dwelling on private services. So relief is sought because the lot size for a lot that is to be on private services needs to be 830 square meters, whereas this lot is about 736 square meters. So this lot is located in the neighborhood, community of but Amini rather, the northern section on the eastern side of Sturgeon Street North. So this parcel is located along a very short road known as Elm Street East. It is one of only 2 lots, both of which that are vacant, which actually front onto Elm Street East proper. There is 28 Sturgeon Road North, which also obtains driveway access off of Elm Street East to the west, but that dwelling faces to Sturgeon Road North. And we can see here that all of the other lots within this block are improved, and that across the road from this is the Trans-Canada Trail, and there's additional residential uses and agricultural uses to the north. And we have the proposed design here. So the dwellings are going to be situated kind of central to a little bit further back in the parcel, and the sewage system is proposed between the dwelling and the road. So here we have a picture of both lot 3 and lot 4 side by side. So all of the other lots, as I said earlier, are developed within this area. And all of the lots are basically of very similar sizes to one another within this block and within the greater developed area to the south and east of here. All of these lots were created in 1896 when the village plan for Omimi for this section was registered. All of the lots that are within this neighborhood, most of them contain older dwellings. Most of the dwellings in this area were constructed somewhere between 1900 and 1940 within this block that the 2 lots are on. So definitely trending towards older built form, but all of the lots do contain single detached dwellings ranging in size from 1 to 2 stories. So a very similar built form is proposed here. Also single detached dwelling, single story. This is just looking at the rear lot lines of both of the lots. And then what I've done in this photograph is kind of walked up to the top of George Street, which is on the image to the left. And then the image on the right is me looking west down Elm Street East. So we can see this is an established community, lots of vegetation, very narrow road, no other lots really fronting on Elm Street East here. And then this is going to the spot where Elm Street East connects with Sturgeon Road. So we have number 28 Sturgeon Road on the corner, and then the subject parcels are about in line with where the white SUV is. So this application is going to facilitate the construction of a built form which is consistent with that that is permitted within the R1 zone. These lots are zoned residential type 1 within the Omimi zoning bylaw, which is the same as all of the other lots in this area that are improved with dwellings. The application has demonstrated that a dwelling can be constructed in compliance with the R1 zone setbacks. It is just the lot size reduction that is sought because private services are proposed. Lots that don't meet the threshold in terms of lot size for private services do require additional review through the form of a variance application to determine if they can be adequately serviced. And in this case, the applicant has demonstrated that they can. Prior to submitting this application, the owner did engage with the engineering department as well as with building a septic division to determine that the lots could be privately serviced. And as part of that request, to seek an exemption from the city's mandatory connection bylaw. So that letter granting the request to have private services was issued by the city, and that letter did accompany the application. As the Omemee secondary plan is under appeal, it is the Victoria County official plan that applies over this area, and the lands are designated urban within that plan. The proposed single attached dwelling use is permitted within the official plan as part of that urban designation. Since the writing of this report, a letter has been received that has been signed by 3 property owners, being, and I'm just going to back up to the aerial photograph so committee can get a sense of where the comments come from. So the first one is from Michelle Bonetta of 35 George Street North, Nick Lash of 11 Victoria Street, and John and Glenna Murray of 30 George Street North. So that should also be included in committee's amended agenda package. Their concerns are that the applicant is seeking to construct on private services, whereas they were required to disconnect their septic systems and connect to the municipal sanitary sewer system. Staff doesn't really have any other comment with respect to what they have submitted for review, other than that the engineering department has issued an exemption to the bylaw for these 2 lots based on the financial constraints that extending the sewage system would cause, as is examined in the staff report. So to conclude, staff does respectfully recommend that the application be granted, subject to the conditions identified in the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Marsh, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Harding. There's reference here that the bylaw has a provision that grants as of right development. What is that bylaw? Have you got, what does it say?
What is meant by that? Through the chair to member Marsh. So most of our bylaws require a lot to be of a certain area or frontage in order to permit development. So committee has seen many of these frontage and area reductions over its years. In the case of Omemee, what they've done is they've separated out that zone provision to say that if you have access to municipal services, your lot size can be smaller. But if you are to build on private services, then your lot size has to be larger. So they're seeking relief from the larger lot size provision because they can't meet the 830 square meter requirement that provision identifies.
So the definition of right, as of right development, does that mean existing lots of record, or does it, because it says here approval to existing lots of record. Well, this is not an existing lot of record. This is a lot that's being created. So it shouldn't apply.
Mr. Chair, is that a question that staff can respond to?
Asking for clarification. Am I reading it wrong, or I don't have access to the bylaw?
I believe it is a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to clarify, we are not creating lots. These lots have existed since 1896. It's just they have not been built upon up until this point.
Oh, sorry. So they're 2 separate lots.
That is correct.
Okay, they're existing 2 separate lots. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought they'd merged and we were splitting them. Okay, that being said, can you show me on the drawing, where is the nearest sewer?
Mr. Chair, let me just share my screen again here and hope, oh, that's much better. I've lost my cursor again, so we will go with what Charlotte has put up. Thank you, Charlotte. So I believe, my understanding is that the sewage, or that there is sanitary servicing along Sturgeon Road North all the way along there. And I believe it comes up along George Street North, being that road on the eastern side that bends around and turns into Elm Street East. I believe it comes up to about in line with number 35 George, and it terminates there.
All those houses.
That's my understanding based on the mapping system available, but of course it is subject to defects and engineering would have better technical information.
So all the houses we see there are currently hooked up to sewers?
That is correct. My understanding is that there is no sewer line that runs between Sturgeon Road North along Elm Street East and connects into the top of where the sewer system is, wherever it is on George Street North.
Okay.
I think I'm with you on what you're trying to get across. So, further questions of the planner? That was my question as well. I think, and just as a matter of comment, I was on council when we were dealing with Omimi's municipal service situation down there, and there was a great deal of municipal money spent down there, and I'm just curious now, when the municipal services are available, that the city would see to exempt, because the whole idea of that is to ensure that properties that can hook up do, simply because it helps financially support everyone else as it relates to sewer and water. So, and I know we've had those kind of issues in Lindsay over and over and over, and I think they've forced most to hook up. So that's, yeah, go ahead.
And
Councillor Yeo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. I will comment due to your comment, and that is that the city does in fact enforce their mandatory hookup bylaw, which clearly states that if services run in front of your house, you must connect to them. And clearly in this case, the services do not run in front of the property, and these people would have to go, if I read the report correctly, at a minimum 170 feet to get to the nearest connection, which would be very cost prohibitive to them at their expense. So the mandatory hookup bylaw is there. These people do not, it does not apply to them. Henceforth, I believe engineering probably came to the same conclusion.
I accept that, but I guess my question is, then why are we being told about it if there's nothing, what is it? It's just because they're trying to be nice as far as providing us with information, because obviously if it doesn't pass by the house, they're not required to hook up. So why are we even being advised of it? Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this goes back to what the minimum lot area must be in order for development to proceed. So in this case, because the Omimi bylaw sets the minimum lot area in order to proceed with development at 830 square meters, development cannot proceed as of right because both of these lots fall slightly below that threshold.
Right, because obviously it would be costly to hook up if they're that far away. Mr. Marsh, go ahead.
Further to what I was saying earlier, so the secondary plan, what does it, if the secondary plan was in place, what does it say regarding this type of development?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the secondary plan's not in effect, so it doesn't have any bearing on this.
Has it been
I would defer to the manager of planning and her policy experience, but I believe it's just identified as a residential area, if memory serves correctly. But that's matching what else is in that area surrounding these parcels.
I'm just curious, is there something though, if the secondary plan is what the city is supporting and saying this is what we believe should be there, does the secondary plan allow for this as of right development?
Mr. Harding. Oh, are you going to the, all right, to the acting manager. Go ahead, Ms. Berry.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. We'll let David off the hook for this one. Yeah, the secondary plans are under appeal, including the one from Omimi, and the sort of flexibility for, or shall I say, the hierarchy of servicing options is contemplated within the secondary plans, meaning if there are a variety of options all the way from full municipal sewer water to partial, to communal, to private, they're contemplated. There are preferences, but again, it's all based on the hierarchy, what's available. And this is fundamentally prefaced on the provincial policy statement and its hierarchy of servicing that helps inform our servicing.
All right, so to put that a simple person's terms, like mine?
Yes, there can be options.
Okay, so they could, if the secondary plan was in place, and they submitted this, and their septics and everything lined up, they would likely still be granted the septic systems rather than having to hook up the sewers.
Mr. Chair, continue through you. The secondary plans look to the existing pattern of development with the policies within it. So certainly the scenario that we're looking at right now is contemplated in the secondary plan. I wouldn't probably go into many more, not specifics, but presumptions on what the policies might end up looking like after the appeals are settled. As of where we stand as per how they were adopted, if we want to just look at them on the face value, the existing conditions are recognized in the secondary plans.
And one more, Mr. Chair, and that's why then, so did the people that were they forced to hook up to the sewers? Or was it an option? Why would the city, if this as of right of development existed, why would they have to pay to hook into the sewers? Was that the case? Did they in fact have to, or was it an option?
Ms. Berry, do you want to respond to that? Or?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if Member Marsh is referring to the owners of these lots or the other ones. Yeah, and actually I would perhaps just turn back to Member Yo's comments about the effect of the mandatory connection bylaw and the location of services when present along your frontage of your property.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The mandatory hookup bylaws actually predates me and was probably adopted when you were on council, but it was never enforced until the last term of council. So it's always been there, was never enforced. Well, I know in Coboconk when the sewers went in, it was in fact mandatory to hook up to it. Yeah, and that was back in the early 90s, I believe. So.
Kind of a hybrid system, Coboconk, is it not? So it's
Just sewers, no water, and yeah, and only half the town's on it. So kind of the same issue that's here. Some people are on it, some people aren't. So.
I agree with the bylaw. I think that if people are within, and obviously that's an exception, but if it runs by your place, you are going to support the municipal services the same as anyone else, and should.
And the exemptions that do apply in some cases, those people still pay a usage or a fee, but not the usage, right? So they don't pay for what they use, but they do pay a fee.
Get them you couldn't hook in Omebe anyhow. They're at capacity. So, but I thought the idea of all these making people hook in was because they were polluting. The septic systems were failing, and they're going to fail, and it's all like it just seems totally backwards to me.
All right.
Are all the properties or any of the properties in Omebe on private water, private wells?
I'm not 100% sure. I think they're mostly all municipal services, I think. Are they another hybrid system? Do we know?
I do.
Mr. Harding?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So pretty much all of Omeme is on well water, with the exception of a newer subdivision in the southwestern area, which is on municipal services for water.
So another hybrid system.
So this Waterloo system they're talking about then, probably Waterloo biofilter system, that is an upgrade from the old-fashioned one, I guess.
Yeah. If my memory serves me correctly, the discussions mostly surrounded lagoons in Omeme, and of course there were those opposed, those supported. So we went through some discussions about that before it finally passed. But anyway, anything further of the planner? All right. Did Ms. Murchison have something to add there? I saw her picture. Welcome, Ms. Murchison. Did you add? Did you wish to add anything?
I was just going to clarify what the Waterloo system is. It's just a type of septic system. It's just the name, a proprietary name for a septic system.
It mustn't have any, what do you call them, lines running out on this small property.
It still does have a small bed, but they're just built in a different way so that they can be more compact.
All right. Any further questions of Ms. Murchison? All right. Thank you for that. Much appreciated. All right. Is the applicant online? Do you wish to speak to the application? And you're
Mr. Chair, yes. My name is Ashlyn Kennedy. I'm a planner at EcoView, and I'm representing Jeremy Kramer, the owner of the 2 lots.
all right. Please go ahead.
I don't have any further. Thanks. I don't have any further comments to add to our proposal. Mr. Harding provided a thorough overview. I would just like to comment that we would like to request an exception to condition number 2, the timeline for construction. My client is concerned with the delays in getting designs and construction materials at this time, that 2 years may not be sufficient to get to that first building inspection. So we're respectfully requesting that committee consider extending that to 3 years or 36 months.
All right.
For both lot 3 and lot 4.
Thank you for that. We'll certainly have the committee consider it. Much appreciate that. Anything further you wish to say? All right, I guess not.
Not at this time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Are there any questions of the applicant? All right. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of the application? In support of the application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? Opposition to the application? Yes, sir. And your name is?
My name is John Murray,
Go-
and
all right.
I'm representing some of the local neighbors, the 3 houses that were mentioned, 35 George Street, 11 Victoria, and 30 George. It seems it's being rushed through. We prior to buying, we were told all options. We had to come off of municipal or off our septic systems and go to municipal sewers. I do know, and I've sat on many meetings between Lindsay water being brought to and from. I'm very aware of all the conditions over the years. At no point do I agree the engineering consulting firm saying that it will cost approximately $250,000 or greater to connect, where the Bialoo water filter treatment systems, which I have been involved in many of them, they run between $30,000 and $50,000 if installed properly. They require great maintenance, annual maintenance and inspections. If these are not carried out in a professional manner, they become just a typical old septic system that fails. At no point has anybody considered a lift station with a force main to connect to the line that runs approximately parallel to the driveway or the center of house number 35 is where the sewer does run up George Street North. A lift station and a force main would only run between $50,000 and $80,000, $100,000 top line to get the system within the municipal requirements, because every home was forced to connect. We had to abandon our septic systems at a cost. And I do believe there is an alternative to putting in more septics based on every house in the surrounding area is on a well. This property to be developed accordingly has to have swales put on both sides, and that the septic systems being placed at the front of the homes to meet some setbacks will actually give the potential for people to park and drive on them, which is the #1 failing cause of septics. And I do believe the mandatory connection bylaw has already been waived, as said earlier by Mr. Harding, I believe. And this was in condition of the guy buying the property. So it seems like this is a foregone conclusion that it's going to be approved, and we're going to jam septic systems in where we could forget about the setbacks and physically connect to a main at probably a lot cheaper cost. That's just how we feel locally.
All right. Thank you for that, sir. Are there any questions of the deputy? Mr. Harding, did you wish to respond to any of that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's not too much I can add other than the exemption request has already been granted. But if committee's interested in learning perhaps what was examined as part of that exemption request, perhaps the applicant has additional financials that they can share with committee.
All right. Ms. Kennedy, do you wish to respond to any of the comments that were made?
No, through you, Mr. Chair, no, I have nothing further to add. I do not have any of those financials available with me today.
All right, for that. All right, thank you, sir, for your comments. They're duly noted. Is there anyone else online wishing to speak in opposition to the application? In opposition to the application? All right, none. Now, before I go to the committee, I think there was a question of 36. Let me go to Mr. Harding first. Does that encumber you in any way, Mr. Harding, if we change that from 24 months to 36?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, it does not.
Right. Question?
The gentleman that spoke, Mr. Murray, referred to a lift and a force or something. Has that procedure been investigated and then attaching to that rather than?
Mr. Harding?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because this was a conversation that occurred with development engineering before the variance applications were filed, I don't have knowledge. All I can offer is a potential speculation. So I would presume that in order for engineering to grant the exemption request, the owner would have had to have submitted preliminary design criteria that costed out what that build would be in order to argue their financial case behind why the exemption was the more viable option to develop these parcels.
Ms. Kennedy, do you have any response to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, I do not. The exemption request was granted prior to my involvement in this project.
All right, thank you. All right, anything further? All right, so I'm looking for a motion as amended. Councillor Yeo.
As printed, as amended.
All right, seconded by Mr. Marsh. All right, any further comments or questions on the motion? All those in favor? And that carries.
I do have to take off, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. The application is approved, Ms. Kennedy. Yeah, it is so. All right, we're now dealing with, let's see, file number D20-2021-063, and this is again for Elm Street, the former village of Umimi. And go ahead, Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in this case, we're now dealing with lot 4, being the easternmost lot of the two twin lots. And this lot is slightly larger than lot 3. So same as before, the relief is being sought from the minimum area requirement of the bylaw in order to permit the lot to develop on private services. And the applicant has submitted documentation which demonstrates that a single detached dwelling can be constructed on the parcel on private septic and well systems. And as before, the rest of this neighborhood is developed. So I am respectfully recommending that the committee grant the application subject to the conditions identified in the report, subject to one amendment based on committee's previous decision and the applicant's request, which is to increase the timeline to first building inspection to 36 months. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now again, committee, we're dealing this as a separate application. So go ahead, Mr. Marsh, you got a question? Are there any questions of the planner? All right, being none. Ms. Kennedy, do you wish to speak to the application?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have nothing further to add at this time.
That being the case, we'll go through this again. Is there anyone online wishing to speak in support of this application? In support of this application? Anyone online wishing to speak in opposition to this application? Opposition to this application? Would appear not. Mr. Marsh.
As printed with the amendment as amended.
Yes, please. All right, do I have a seconder, Ms. Archer? All right.
I'd like to speak to it this time only.
Yes, go ahead.
Although I don't support, I don't understand the rationale, I mean, and we've asked all the right questions, whether it's good planning in my mind or anyone else's. I mean, looking at the variance, there's really no alternative. I feel for the people that have to pay into this. I feel for everybody's arguments, but the fact is, it's been done properly. We've been through the process, and again, I thank the planners and our staff for their support in getting it through to us.
No, very well said. Anything further from Ms. Archer? Did you speak further? No. All right. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. That application is approved as well, Ms. Kennedy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just a quick one. I don't know if you even want to take the time now. I find it interesting that quite often the topic of sheds comes up. And sheds, a lot of these garden sheds are less than 100 square feet, which I understand you don't need a building permit for. I don't understand how we have the right to say to people, move this a meter or a half a meter. I've had a couple of people provide feedback to me who have said, I've been asked to move my shed. Now, I won't tell you what the comment was, but I'm just wondering where we have the justification to become involved in that and whether it's something we should continue to do.
Well, Mr. Chair, through you, you may not love the answer. I'm going to fall back on legislation here. Ultimately, the Provincial Planning Act that governs the rules around how zoning bylaws are written and what council has the authority to adopt speaks to regulating the use of lands, buildings, and structures. So those three are captured in zoning bylaws under Section 34 of the Planning Act.
I hear what you're saying, but I still have the same question. One of the individuals who spoke to me said, Steve, my shed's been there for 20 years, and now I apply for a permit for something totally different, and they're telling me to move the shed. Makes no sense whatsoever. And anyway, I just question whether we have the authority to ask people to move sheds like that.
Yeah. Did you wish to comment further, Leah?
I won't waste the committee's time to reiterate what I said. I appreciate the comment and the question, and if there were some opportunity for us to look at definitions, because one thing that the Planning Act doesn't speak to is the definition of structure. This is where our work in planning overlaps with the building code. I know my colleague is on the line as well, if we wanted to sort of extend the conversation in that regard. In terms of what differentiates a building from a structure. But if we were to look at going forward, for example, in the comprehensive zoning bylaw update, either rural or urban, both, that would be one way to tackle this issue, sort of long-term. So I'm not saying that it's an indefinite no or a no in perpetuity, that there's opportunities to look at that, but the authority to structure, quote unquote, by definition, it lies in both the Planning Act and certainly the Building Code. And I hope my colleague doesn't think I'm putting words in her or any other professional's mouths speaking to the Building Code.
I don't think we've ever been, I don't think we've made anyone with one of those small sheds ever come for minor variance just with that, regarding that, and I think that's been the ongoing thing. I know we discussed many times is planners look at it, it's a good way to clear everything up at the same time, I think is the intent. But I also don't believe that, and it was said, I mean, a good planner's not gonna say you can ignore my recommendation, but it is up to this committee. And I certainly, if someone was ever put to task over just a 9x9 shed, I would really have an issue if they had to pay a fee. So, but there is no reason why we can't, we've debated it before, we can take it out of the, we have the authority to do it. I don't think the city's going to appeal on that basis, but it's up to us ultimately.
But let's not forget, the planner is going to have justification for whatever they're wanting to do. But a good point you make, because not only have we asked them to move on occasion, there are occasions when they've said, get them off the property. They have. So it's a case of not just moving sometimes, it's a case of you have to take it down. So.
Not to prolong it, but I guess that, Mr. Chair, is why I question it, because I believe anybody can go out to Canadian Tire, Home Hardware, buy one of these sheds and place it on their property. And I don't think we want to get into enforcing that on a large scale as a municipality.
All right, anything? Yes.
Are we on the issue of our training that you didn't want to do online?
Well, I was told, I've been dealing with the acting director on that, and he indicated that, in fact, they were going to do their best to get something together for us. I can't do it at home, so I'll be honest with you. If they're not able to accommodate me, I'm going to have to say bye-bye, because apparently this is compulsory. So I will. I'll have to resign from the committee. Yeah, it's 3 hours. While I'm waiting for that. But I was kind of hoping, if you'll recall, when we did the workplace harassment, that was about a 3-hour one as well. And we did it here before and after meetings. So I'm kind of hoping, mind you, we've only got 2 meetings left. But yeah, December 31st. So yes, you can. If you want to do it at home, it's no problem. I guess, yeah, it has to be done. It's compulsory from the federal government, so.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I have completed it, and I found it very straightforward and fairly easy once I got going on. The only thing I would question, I think I spent 5 to 6 hours on it. There's no way I could do it in 3 hours.
And you're absolutely right. That's exactly what I've been told. It's probably going to be a 5 or 6 hour thing if you take your time and do it. It's not a case I don't want to do it. Of course I would like to do it, but if it comes to push versus shove and I'm told you got to do it at home, I'll be resigning from the committee, so because I can't do anything else. So, go ahead, Senator.
I have started the course, and it took me probably 2 hours just to do other preliminary and section 1.
I'll be honest with you. My wife and I are, well, I'm totally computer illiterate, and I'll be honest with you, I don't want to be any other way. I have no interest in them whatsoever. My wife is not bad, but we just use it for emails and that sort of thing. I don't have a printer. The printer is an old thing, and I have no intentions of upgrading it to a bunch of dollars to accommodate anybody. If I'm going to accommodate somebody, it's going to be me, and I don't need to accommodate it for that. If the city can't accommodate me, then I'm done.
I was under the understanding we were going to be getting notification of this. I haven't received anything other than the first thing. How did you get started on it?
I did receive a second email which gave us the link to access the course.
But yeah, and I was talking to somebody from the city, and they just said that it's a 2 hour thing just to sort of get into things and do it. So it's yes, Mark, go ahead. Now, maybe to you, have you heard anything further, or Leah, about as to what they're going to do? my concern, it's mandatory, and if you don't get it, you're out. So that's the way it is. Yeah. Yeah. Leah, could I ask you to pursue that maybe a little bit for us? And I'm quite willing to come in on my own, but if we can do it at the committee level, that's fine too. But I'm quite willing to come in on my own if they can supply the workplace. So maybe you could, if you could just maybe find out a little bit for us.
Yeah, that's no problem. Mr. Chair, you had mentioned that you initiated a discussion with the Director of Development Services? Yes? Through Richard? Yeah. Great. Yep. Well, I'll pick up the conversation there. No problem.
One thing I would say, we at the last meeting discussed the signatures that Charlotte has, so we sent them in. And Charlotte is totally comfortable with it. But now you had one today, and that's why I asked. Emmett didn't put his hand up for that deferral. So that's why I asked for, so please note those just so that you can properly record the signature. And everyone's still comfortable with that? All right, okay. All right, next meeting is November 4th. Now, Dave, believe it or not, for the first time in a lot of years, I'm available. Yeah, things have changed. I'm hunting a bit with my grandson in November, and he's not going to be available for some of this, so I'm not quite as eager as I used to be. So, yeah, so I'll be available for the 5th then. So, all right, that being the case, can I get a motion to adjourn? Ms. Archer, Ms. Richardson, all those in favor? And that carries.